The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone, so we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for like a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.
Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. We're talking about Mary Queen of Scots. There's something about Mary Queen of Scots. This is part 9. I'm joined by Allison Epstein. Allison, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be back for part 9. Remember when you thought this could be 4?
It is to laugh. Yeah. And this is part 9. And I do want to just let everybody know there will be a part 10. So, we're going to all gently wean ourselves off of this discussion. The references, I'm very, very excited to tell you the references for this episode because one of them is Mary's recently unciphered secret sexy code letters.
Hell yeah.
Oh my gosh. This is like, I was planning, I think it was in February of this past year, 2023, where it was revealed that these letters were unciphered. And I was already planning, like I was in the midst of doing this season. I'm like, great, when I get to that part of the story, I'm excited to read those letters. So I didn't really read up about it until preparing for this episode. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is really exciting. Have you seen that there's other people who are not me are really excited that this like book of hours that was owned by Thomas More?
Yeah.
Like some people are really excited. It's like, oh my God, it's the book he's holding his portrait. And I'm just like, okay.
I think Thomas More is whatever, but like show me more letters from Mary. That's way more fun.
It's way more fun. It was really exciting. So John Guy, who I didn't use his book for this episode, but his biography of Mary Queen of Scots was the one that was the basis for the Saoirse Ronan movie. It's the biography I mostly used as a source for the first 3/4 of this series. Anyway, he was quoted as saying, like, this is the most significant Mary Queen of Scots discovery in 200 years. This changes everything. And he's not wrong. It's really exciting. And it adds a real flavor and color to this episode that like none of the biographies I read include because it was just discovered just recently. So, but I will shout out the biographies I used. So, The Betrayal of Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth I and Her Greatest Rival by Kate Williams, Embroidering Her Truth by Claire Hunter. Got to get that textile embroidery discussion, of which there will be in this episode as well. Imprisoning Mary Queen of Scots, The Men Who Kept the Stuart Queen by Mickey Mayhew, published by Pen and Sword Book. An article from History Today by Cyril Hampshire, an article from BBC. And then, and I'm going to put the link to this in the show notes. So from Cryptologia magazine for cryptology enthusiasts, the academic journal, I should say, for cryptology enthusiasts, an article called Deciphering Mary Queen of Scots' Lost Letters from 1578 to 1584 by George Lasry, Norbert Bierman, and Satoshi Tomokio, which they made available online to anybody. Thank you. Thank you for not making me have to sneak into the university library to read this paper. Thank you. I want to talk about these letters. So, more than 50 letters Mary wrote were decoded by a team of crypto-analysts. So they helped shed light on what Mary was thinking during this time period we're talking about, during this spy shit. So the people who did this, I love this. It's just three nerds, and I say that with absolute affection. It's these three guys. So George Lasry of Israel, Norbert Bierman of Germany, and Satoshi Tomokio of Japan are part of an international community of code breakers and scholars. For fun,
just for fun.
They just go to archives, look up letters that are in code, and just try to figure the codes on those letters. They weren't being like, we're going to find Mary Queen of Scots papers. They're just guys who just do this. And it turns out these were Mary Queen of Scots papers. They all have day jobs.
Can you imagine being like an amateur code breaker, just going through a letter, being like, hang on, guys, hang on. What the fuck? This letter that we're decoding that we found in an old book somewhere in Italy is Mary Queen of Scots' letter. Like, I would lose my fucking mind.
Well, no, and that's the thing. So just reading about them and their discovery, they found stuff like, so the letters are written in code in French. Like, it's French letters put into code. So I'm going to say in English, but like it would say like my son or like my imprisonment. So like, okay, so these were written by like a woman who's imprisoned, who has a son. And then they got the name Walsingham and they're like, Walsingham? Walsingham? Like, hold on. And then they're like, holy shit. Because they were just in these random Italian archives with other papers that had just been misfiled, basically. So these guys, I want to tell you, they all have day jobs. George Lasry is a computer scientist. Norbert Bierman is a pianist and musical coach. And Satoshi Tomokio is an astrophysicist. They're straight up just nerds with a hobby.
I love.
So they joined forces on this project, which began as a part of a larger effort to decipher archival documents. And they ended up uncovering more than 55 letters that Mary wrote during her time in England. So what's cool about these letters? Everything. One thing that I was so excited I had to tell Allison already is that Mary uses code names. So part of the way the cipher works is there's like a symbol that means a certain person. But when she starts using code name for a person, she has to write in the letter like, henceforth, this means this. So she gives nicknames to all these guys, just like I do on this podcast. I was like, she's just like me. Oh my god.
And careened into my DMs being like, Mary's got nicknames for all these assholes too. And I was just so happy. Like, she's also like, there's too many fucking men named James. Let me just draw those things.
It's like, no, anyway, just reading these letters, I'm just like, first of all, Mary is just like what I thought she was like. Like, just like the books I've read where people are saying like, she did this means this is probably what she was thinking. And then I sort of extrapolate that to be like, this is kind of the person I think she is. And the letters make it clear that that is what she was like. She was that bitch.
Yeah.
She wasn't just sitting around being sad.
I love them because there's new information in there, but at the same time, it does not force me to rethink anything I thought I knew about Mary because she is so fucking consistently that person that like her voice is so loud in everything I've ever read from her or about her. I'm just like, it's more Mary, but it's exactly the same. It's great.
Well, and it's great because these were letters that were written in French, put into cipher, decoded, retranslated back into English, and you still get her personality. Like, her writing is so evocative. Like, there's such a voice to it. She's, like, snarky and bitchy. And because these were ciphered letters, she doesn't have to be like, my dear esteemed gentleman. She's writing just like, this fucking bitch. Not those words. But that's the vibe.
Yeah,
like, she's being honest in these letters in a way that she's not in official letters we've seen before.
Because she doesn't think anybody but the recipient's ever going to read this. So, like, we're getting unfiltered Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yes.
And she's just so petty about it. It's so good.
She's exactly who I thought she was, which was reassuring and like exciting. But yeah, so in the one letter she wrote, "This gentleman who will be called between us Latour," and that's what I sent Allison. So I was like, "This gentleman between us known as WD-40." Like,
Between us known as Councilman Jeremy Jam.
So exciting, so exciting. So just to recap, because perhaps if you're not just binging all these episodes in a day, like some sort of person who has 12 hours in a row, last time we were talking about Mary went to England. There was this fake show trial that ended with her being found neither guilty nor innocent of Darnley's murder. And so she's just in a holding pattern. But basically, there was the Northern Rebellion. There was no obvious connection between that. But the Rodolphi plot kind of made it seem like, oh, and this is probably like, did Cecil get Rodolphi to do all this? Because basically Mary was no longer being held captive because she might have killed Darnley. She's not captive because by her perhaps involvement in the Rodolphi plot, she had maybe tried to kill Elizabeth. So it's just like Cecil had reason to keep her there now indefinitely.
Yeah.
Elizabeth refused to condemn her. Parliament kept trying to force Elizabeth to treat Mary as a common subject and put her on trial, but Elizabeth always refused that because Mary was a queen. She was not Elizabeth's subject. This would undermine Elizabeth, like the authority of queens in general. But she did agree if Mary did anything again, like they're really fencing her in with these, like, if anyone thinks that Elizabeth might die, if someone else does a rebellion, even if it wasn't Mary, she'll be liable. Like, if she did anything ever again, she could be tried by a set of nobles, is what Elizabeth decided. So Cecil is just like, okay, like, I really need to get indisputable evidence to get Elizabeth, this person who just like will never commit to anything, to actually agree to find Mary guilty of something.
So, like, the laws are set up so that it can be the flimsiest evidence possible. But Elizabeth, personally, is not going to give him the go-ahead unless she's sure. So they still do, they can't just, like, wave their hands and say, she's guilty now. Like, they still need something. Not for legal reasons, but for convince the queen so she'll pull the trigger reason.
Exactly. And so they needed, like, Cecil and Walsingham need Mary to be clearly complicit in a plot to murder Elizabeth. And the evidence it can't just be casket letters, erotic fan fiction. It needs to be like Mary writing in a letter like, hell yeah, let's kill Liz. Like, they need that. Meanwhile, Mary, at this point, disenchanted with the legal, quote unquote, system, which I presume she had been for a while. So she needed to scheme her way out of this on her own. Like, before she'd been like, I'm just going to wait until Elizabeth like sees my son. I'm going to marry T-Dog. But now she's just like, fuck this. I need to do some spy shit. Get Spain up in here. Like, let's go.
Yeah. This is no longer, let's try to get Elizabeth on my side and maybe it'll all go. This is burn it down era Mary. Because what else is she going to do? She's got her back against the wall. And we know how Mary acts when her back is against the wall. She's like, let's turn my scheme up to 15 and burn down whatever we have to get out of this. This is all.
This is Mary fork in eye energy. So it is by now 1572. So it's been like 4 or 5 years since she's been in England. So she's still in Sheffield with Mr. and Mrs. Bess of Hardwick. And I need to update you with several things that happened this year in other countries. So August 1572. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre happens in France.
Thanks,
so that's
Deguises.
where her Deguise uncles cause yet another massacre. Mark that on your bingo card. Along with Catherine de' Medici are responsible for the massacre of numerous Protestants in France. We talk about that in the Catherine de' Medici episode. I talk about that in the Queen Margot episode. Not going to get into it now. Lots of other things to discuss. What this means to Mary is it makes Elizabeth and England wary of Catholics in general.
Even more than before, after the Pope had already excommunicated Elizabeth and said anyone who wants to can murder her. Now they're actually going around and murdering Protestants. So
yeah. So just
great.
like, it's like this happened in France. So like, what if this makes the Catholics in England start killing Protestants here? Elizabeth is a Protestant, but also they're like the Deguises were involved. Mary is a Deguise. So like that makes them more, it's like she had nothing to do with that specifically, but it's just like the Deguise relationship ever more fucks things up for her.
Super reasonable actually on Elizabeth's part to be like, I am not feeling great about this. Like, yeah, I get it.
That October, so most recently the regent for baby BJ, James, the King of Scotland, a little boy. The Earl of Mar dies, probably being poisoned by the other assholes. So they have to choose a new regent again, and this time they choose Jeremy Jam from Parks and Recreation, which is bad news because he has always hated Mary, continues to hate Mary. He will side with Elizabeth against her. Like, that's his whole vibe. November of the same year. This is where it was really crucial I just wanted this chronology because I'm like, so many things happened.
So many things.
In what order? Yeah. So John Knox dies.
Hey!
Hallelujah. So he dies at home, surrounded by his friends and some of the greatest Scottish nobles around him.
And
He
his
asked for
teenage
the
wife.
Bible to be read aloud, and his child bride, Margaret, did so. He was buried at St. Giles Church in Edinburgh, which was destroyed in 1633. Not sure why. And the precise site of his grave cannot be established anymore. Good. I wonder if there's John Knox ghosts anywhere. Just
Oh, he just shows up anywhere there are more than 3 women at the same time, just being like, it's a whore!
whores. And this is my favorite thing. So in his will, he claimed, he was basically explaining why he wasn't leaving very much money to anybody. And he said, none have I corrupted, none have I defrauded, merchandise have I not made. And I laughed and laughed when I read that because I was like, he is my enemy. And I'm like, merchandise I have made with his name on it.
Where is your God now, John Knox? I've made a minimal amount of money from that. So suck it.
Yeah, it is the best-selling merch I've ever done is John Knox, anti-John Knox merch. Anyway, so just so you know, his child bride, who is now an adult but was married as a child, Margaret married again someone called Andrew Kerr, who was one of those involved in the murder of David Rizzio. And at first I was like, Margaret. But then I was like, well, how many men in Scotland who are nobles weren't involved in the murder of David Rizzio?
There were 200 of them, right? So, yeah, that's fair.
It's hard to find someone who wasn't. John Knox's death was barely noticed at the time. Although his funeral was attended by the nobles of Scotland, no major politician or diplomat mentioned his death in their surviving letters. Because he sucks. Mary, Queen of Scots, made only 2 brief references to him in her letters, basically just being like, suck it, hate you. You're dead, good. Winter turns to spring. Now we're in May 50. This episode, like previous episodes, like the Rizzio murder, the Darnley murder, it's like, okay, this day, this happened in the morning. This is in the afternoon. It's like the whole episode takes place over 3 days. This episode is like a montage. Like, Mary is in this house and time is passing.
She's imprisoned. There's lots of times when nothing is happening and the schemes have to move in slow motion because she can't leave.
She's waiting for letters to and from. So now May 1573, at which point in Edinburgh, so Edinburgh Castle, and we saw this in other episodes, it's like whoever holds that castle kind of has control over the city. And until this point, Edinburgh Castle had been held by Mary supporters, by people who wanted her to return. Wildly, the person in charge of it at this point was William Kirkcaldy of Grange, who had been anti-Mary in 2 major battles. Last time we heard about him, he was chasing down Bothwell in the ocean. Anyway, he'd been on her side, but he, along with Scottish Machiavelli, were among her most devoted supporters. But Jeremy Jam is the regent. He hates Mary. He and the Protestants capture the castle. And with that, they claim Edinburgh. So now the city no longer supports her, which weakens her cause in Scotland in general. Oh, and then this is, let's see. We already talked about him, but this is December 1573 is when Walsingham is officially appointed spymaster. So these things, like he was already on the scene.
He was kind of unofficially doing the spymaster stuff. And Queen Elizabeth was like, maybe we should give you a job title because you're going to be doing this for me anyway.
Yeah. So this is where I wrote, months are just passing by, like that montage in the second Twilight movie. And Mary is still stuck inside writing letters, embroidering increasingly gruesome things, like doing what she can. She's also got more sophisticated with her super secret spy cipher stuff, like way back when she was in France. Like she learned about writing letters and ciphers and codes, but it's been decades. And so there's been developments in spy shit and she's keeping up with it. So, for instance, she found out a way to use alum on taffeta as a kind of invisible ink. Spy letters on fabric is a thing she's doing.
It's very her. She'll have a secret outfit.
Exactly. And then also there's in 1 second, I'm going to ask you to explain about the letters and the folding and the ciphers. But there's also so many other things where it's like if she ordered fabric and slightly more came than she requested, that was a hint that there was a secret communication in the parcel. Like there's so many things that are like not the letters themselves, but things surrounding the letters and how they were delivered would be secret clues. It's just like 4-dimensional chess all the time.
She's so good at this.
Green ribbons could be attached to books to indicate specific pages, or a note could be hidden in a shoe's heel. Like,
you remember when she was sneaking out of Loch Levin and she's like, as soon as somebody hands this person a pearl earring, it will be time to get started. I'm like, it's just, she's sneaky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you explain about the ciphers and the folding, please?
Yeah. So like there's the classic cipher letter, right? Which is just a fancy way of saying it's in code. So she would make up her own sort of alphabet situation where she would have her own, like this symbol would mean this letter, but then this symbol would mean these 3 letters when they come together. And this one symbol would be just this guy's name. So it was like not a 1-to-1. You couldn't like break it super easily. She had these super sophisticated systems that she was using, but she also like didn't stop there, and she would fold the letters into these like origami situations where like you could read the message when the letter was folded in the right way. The letters would like line up in the right order, and then like if you opened it, you could tell that someone had tampered with it, and you'd know that like maybe your message isn't safe. And it's like this is like the low tech cybersecurity of it all is just so. She's like encrypting things and then encrypting them within her encryption, and then she's folding the letter to encrypt the actual symbols, and it's just like so intense.
Well, and then she's taking that folded letter and putting it in a pile of 5 other letters. And the fact that it's third in the pile, that means every, like it's...
And then there's a green ribbon,
like,
so you know that it's Tuesday, and it's just like insane.
Yeah. And so this is like the level of these guys. The 3 are friends, the astrophysicist, the music tutor. They found these letters. They didn't know what they were. And they're just like, okay, so they fed them into this computer program. The computer program, like a contemporary, like computer program could only decrypt 30% of it.
Yeah.
Like,
and that's why I'm such a fangirl of Walsingham, like even though I'm Team Mary, because like Walsingham and his spies did not have a computer algorithm to feed these letters into. Like they were just sitting here by hand being like, let's break this incredibly sophisticated code by the smartest person on this island. And we have to do it fast because we think she's going to assassinate the queen. Like the stakes are so high and the cryptology of it is so complicated, and it's 1572 and no one has AI. It's just wild.
But this brings us to another character in this story whose name is, I believe, Ben Philippe. Do you know who I mean?
I do. No one really knows how to spell his name or what his first name is. He is.
No, and this is why I call him, just based on the spelling of his last name, Ryan Phillippe is how I'm going to refer to him. The actor and ex-husband of Reese Witherspoon, because his last name, there's so many L's and so many P's.
No one knows how to spell it. Yeah.
So this guy, Ryan Phillippe, he is like this savant. He's the one who like, he can crack the codes. He can forge anyone's handwriting.
He can like sneak the seals off of letters so that it doesn't look like anyone's opened these like super sealed communications. He's the hacker of the 1570s. He can get into anything. And I love him. And in my book, A Tip for the Hangman, I modeled my Kit Marlowe off of Ryan Phillippe because I thought that guy was just so cool. And all of his like, it's just the skills you have to do that is...
It's wild. It's wild because it's like, and honestly, I think, like you had said, like the reason why Elizabeth was successful, she had Walsingham and she had Cecil, and I would argue, and she has Ryan Phillippe. Like, without Ryan Phillippe, how much could Walsingham have done? Like this guy, if
you can't read the letters, you don't have any proof of anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So this guy, Ryan Phillippe, I picture it like you just said, you just inspired this thought in my head. It's like in a heist movie or like an NCIS or whatever. There's the really weird nerd with like no social skills, but they're so good at doing this. But they're so good at hacking. It's like this guy who's just like, how could anyone be so good at this? And yet he was. And like how fortunate that Walsingham found him and that he was on that side.
And like Walsingham's spy recruitment was so weird anyway, because he was going into like colleges and universities being like, this guy seems smart. I bet you he'd be really good at codes. Let me go get that guy. Like he was not going in the nobility. Like, let me go get one of the Howards because they're powerful and they've got good connections. He's like, let me go get this weirdo from Oxford who's like doing lots of math. And I love that.
No, I love it. And it's so smart because in the nobility, who are you going to get? Like T-Dog. Like these guys are not good.
Yeah, you're going to get that asshole.
Those guys are not. No, you need these like real weird nerds. Yeah.
You need the
So
weird nerds who can go undercover and like no one's going to notice them. You're gonna see T-Dog walking down the street and be like, "Is that Thomas Howard? I should watch what he's going to do." Like you're not going to look at weird Oxford math man. It's
yeah,
great.
he was really. I'm on Mary's side, but I respect that the other side is equally good. Like equally good at what they're doing. Spy shit, like the spy versus spy. Like this whole thing has become like a John le Carre novel, but Tudor era, where it's just like really capable, smart spies just out spying each other. And it's a nice change from just like the chaotic asshole lords, just like.
By the 1570s, everyone left involved in the story is so good at it that like it's just so tense. You start in the beginning, you're like, no one knows what the fuck is going on. Should we stab him 86 times? Why not? But by like the end of this, you're like, oh boy, we've all learned a thing.
Yeah. No, it's a real different vibe. Like when she gets to England, Mary, like her story really shifts into what kind of story it is. So by now, so it's been God knows how many years. But anyway, Bess and Mr. Bess are still in charge of her. They're still paying for her lifestyle. They
Your
started
Bess
this
must be
off
so fucking pissed.
incredibly rich, and they are less so. Just like the cost of keeping her there and just the responsibility of having, it's like they got married. And a couple months later, Elizabeth was like, hey, can you just like take this woman, go live in your swamp house indefinitely? Like this is taking a toll on their marriage, Bess and Mr. Bess. They're like, they didn't really have any time to be together and be married before Mary was there. And not to say that Mary was like sexy and having an affair with Mr. Bess, but it's just like she's there and that's responsibility. And that's really stressful.
It's like you have a house guest. You're not going to be like as intimate with your partner if you have someone like down the hall. But if that someone down the hall might be plotting treason, you're going to be like extra not in the mood for that.
Yeah. And like Mr. Bess had to always be paying attention to her and reading all of her letters and everything. It's just like, it's a lot. They're tired.
And they're broke because she's eating 16 courses per meal.
Exactly. Okay, so May 1574, at which point the King of France, Charles IX, dies of tuberculosis, etc. So he had no legitimate heirs. So the new French king is his younger brother, Catherine de Medici's next youngest son, Henri, who is a gay crossdresser. I just wanted to throw that out there because...
Can I ask you a question, Anne, about Charles? Was Charles the one in the Queen Margot movie who died bleeding sweat?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I remember him.
He was in real life, he was a sickly person. And in the movie Queen Margot, his sweat is blood. And he just dies of gruesomeness, really.
He dies of bleeding sweat. It's bad.
There's a lot. He's wearing white. Margot is wearing white. The red is very notable. Yeah,
this
so he's just
like favorite film, which does a lot.
Greatest movie of all time, Queen Margot. Anyway, so he dies. He was always just a puppet for Catherine de Medici, whatever. And now Henri also is, really. Anyway, Henri, crucially, is younger. Like, he's so young that when Mary was growing up in France, Henri, I can't switch back with French names, English words. So when Mary was growing up in France, Henri was like a little baby. Like, he doesn't have any emotional connection to her like Charles did. Like, Charles was a bit younger than Mary, had a crush on her. Like, so he was always maybe wanting to help her out a bit. Henri has no loyalty to her whatsoever. Catherine de Medici, still anti-Mary in general. And then, honestly, Allison, like the timeline I wrote up just to be able to put this all together. August 1574, in England, a woman named Douglas Sheffield, a female Douglas, gives birth to a son who she named Robert Dudley. Why would this woman name her baby Bobby Duds? Because she is his secret wife, and this is their child.
Secret wife.
But Elizabeth doesn't know about this yet, but this comes up later.
I imagine it will.
Robert Dudley is all over this story in a way I did not expect. But I guess he's right there with Elizabeth. Like, she's got Walsingham, Cecil, and Ryan Philippi helping her out. And Bobby Duds is just kind of like fucking women, having illegitimate children, just not Darnley, but like 1% Darnley vibes.
Not Darnley. Yeah. I love that, like, Bobby Duds keeps showing up in the story, and not once does he want to be included in this narrative. Every time he's like, I sure hope no one brings me back into this mess. And here we are again. Like, proposed threesome, surprise Catholic problem, Now there's a baby I didn't want. Just leave this man alone. He's weird.
So this same month, August 1574, over in France, Mary's uncle, the cardinal, the de Guise cardinal, dies. And with him, that's kind of like that generation of de Guise. Like the de Guise uncles are now all deadsville. She's like, those guys who fucked up her life are now all dead. There's de Guises, but now they're like younger de Guises, and she doesn't know them. Like they kind of don't care about her. So that connection is sort of less than it was. And around this time, in the house where Mary was living, a visitor arrived who was her ex-mother-in-law, Darnley's mother, Margaret Douglas. Margaret Douglas.
Scheming queen, Margaret Douglas. Bless.
So she shows up, and she and Mary make amends. Last time we saw Margaret Douglas, she was blaming Mary for the death of Darnley, being put in the Tower of London. So she comes to visit. Why is she there? So they kind of bury the hatchet, but she's kind of there because Margaret Douglas and Bess of Hardwick have this scheme to get their adult children secret sexy married to each other. And they did this by Margaret Douglas showed up with her son. Bess of Hardwick's daughter was there, and they kind of like force meet cuted them, sort of.
I don't know why it seems so weird to me that Darnley had a brother.
Yeah.
Imagine being his brother, just watching that happen near you. You're like,
his name was Charles Stewart. So anyway, Bess's daughter, Elizabeth Cavendish, was married to Darnley's younger brother. There is a painting that was done, I think, commissioned by Margaret Douglas, or maybe by her husband, who's not dead yet. That's like of her and I think like the family all in prayer and baby James being like, avenge me. Like,
baby James did a lot of screaming, God avenge my cause. Like, what a meme that must be.
It was. There's so many memes in this story. Not a new phenomenon at all. Anyway, so this marriage happened. So it's Darnley's younger brother, Charles. So the whole reason, like the whole thing with Darnley was like he has a claim to the English throne through his mother, who is the daughter of Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister. So Charles Stewart has that same claim, effectively.
Yeah,
so he married
another one. Yeah. Maybe hopefully a little bit less shitty, but who's to know?
From what I can tell. Yeah, less shitty. Anyway, so this is the whole thing. Like, he can't marry without Elizabeth's permission. But as per ever on this podcast, no one ever asks Elizabeth's permission. And these two become the parents of Arbella Stewart. So, who I did an episode about a while ago. Anyway, that's where she comes from. But also, this is some scheming. So, like, Bess of Hardwick, again, I'm going to do a whole episode about her. But, like, Bess is, like, she's embroidering and she's also doing her own scheming to try and get her grandchild to be the new Queen of England, basically.
I'm obsessed with all of the grandma scheming that's happening. They're just like, okay, not me and not my son, but my grandson will be King of England. I'll be dead by then, but by God, I'll know that I will.
My bloodline. Yeah.
It's incredible.
This is interesting though too. So I was starting to make a list and then I stopped. But of people who claim to be like, oh, you know, like apparently I'm descended from Mary Queen of Scots. People say that, but I'm like, no one ever says, if you're descended from Mary Queen of Scots, you're descended from Darnley. Like,
yeah, congrats.
Not a thing to brag about necessarily. Yeah, and you're also descended from Margaret Douglas.
Okay, I would brag about that though. I love her.
She was great. But yeah, I was looking up to be like, because people, for instance, so Mary Queen of Scots, we'll do this now, because why not? So her son is baby BJ. He had various children. Among them were Charles I. Charles I is the father of sexy Charles II, my shameful crush. Charles II is the one who messed around with Hortense Mancini, with Phoebs. Like, he had so many illegitimate children. So Charles II had so many illegitimate children. All of England today basically is descended from Charles II, like including Diana, Princess of Wales. And so that means like William and Harry are all their little kids. But then also Camilla, Queen Camilla is descended from one of these offshoots. Like, so many people are descended. So people are always like, oh, I'm descended from Mary Queen of Scots. It's like, no, you're descended from Phoebs. Like, you're descendant from like, like people always say Mary Queen of Scots.
A lot of people are descended from Mary Queen of Scots via all of her like man whore descendants. Like,
yeah.
They got around. Like, she only had one kid. They went nuts.
And also, if you're descended from Mary Queen of Scots, you're descended from baby BJ, like James the 6th/1st. Like, You can't be like, I choose this one ancestor. There's so many dirtbags in this family tree, but I only got genes from her. It's like, no, they were filtered down through.
If you go in any direction on this family tree, you're like, oh, a shitty person and a worse person and a worse person. Here's the one good person I will claim descendants.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me how many people. I was going to do a meme on, and I might still, I was going to post pictures of people and people could vote. Which of these descendants do you think they're more Mary or more Darnley? I might still do that. I don't know. But
I mean, I feel like in the modern royal family, we all know our answers, but we won't get into that.
That's the thing. And do I want to get into that? it kind of goes without saying. Anyway, so Elizabeth found out about this treason marriage of Charles Darnley's brother to Bess of Hardwicke's daughter. So as per ever, her permission had not been asked for or granted. Like, you know what? I make fun of her, but it's like, she's like, my subjects. I ask of you one thing, to ask my permission before you get married. No one ever does. Of course she gets married. Like, it keeps happening. Everyone with a claim to the throne.
Marriages. It keeps being treason grandmas trying to hook up their kids. And like, she's not wrong to ask them not to do that.
No,
it's
exactly.
A bad move.
Yeah. So she sent Margaret Douglas to the Tower of London, a place she had been by now 2 or 3 times. I love this. Bess of Hardwicke was summoned to London, but just didn't go.
I cannot emphasize enough how hard I would watch the HBO miniseries Treason Grandmas of the Tudor times. Like, they're so
the real
good.
treason housewives, yeah.
The real treason housewives, yes.
So, but this is like Mary's opportunity. So Bess is in disgrace. Darnley's mom is in jail. And Mary is like, what if I try and win over Elizabeth via embroidery? So she's had a hookup, like a fabric hookup forever, right? She's always like, because she and Mary Seton are finding out what's the latest, what are the cuffs, what are the lace trims. Like, she's keeping up with her fashion. And so she got her fabric source to send her. And these are some of the letters. I forget if this is from the Claire Hunter book or from Mary's letters, but she's like, I want this specific fabric. She sent like a swatch. She's like, I want it to be like this, but a bit more red, some silver thread. And what she did is she embroidered Elizabeth a skirt. Like, she made a skirt and then put embroidery. The embroidery was in silver. It was the intertwined floral devices of Scotland and England, the thistle and the rose mixed with other blossoms. The red was meant to remind Elizabeth of their shared blood as family members. And being sewn by Mary personally was the ultimate appeal of this garment, because hand sewing for someone else was so intimate. It wasn't just like, hey, I bought you this gift card. It's like, I crafted this for you.
And Mary's still a queen. Like, that's Queen Elizabeth sitting down and I'm going to make you an outfit and hand it to you personally. Like, if that happened to any English subject, they would just like die of honor. Like, that's quite something.
This is like, and her fashion sense and her embroidery vibes, I just like, oh my God, this is like, I don't know, Christian Siriano made this for me personally. Like, it would be just the fashion side of it.
Christian Siriano, who's also the president of the United States, like, that's the vibe.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. So I'm trying to think, who's a person who's both very fashionable and also very politically powerful? I don't know.
I'm like, Michelle Obama was the first one I thought of.
Yeah, it's like Michelle Obama like stitched me, or she like hand beaded these earrings, like you would die. So apparently Elizabeth said, oh, this skirt is very nice. And this made Mary heard about this. She was really excited. Like, Elizabeth, I think, wore the skirt. And so then Mary sent along 3 night headdresses.
Like little Christmas Carol nightcaps.
Yep.
Like Ebenezer Scrooge. And yes, wonderful.
I love it. I think that would win you over.
It would.
So anyway, so Mary's she's embroidering. She and Beth are creating all these embroideries suggestive of Mary's life, as discussed previously. Some of them more traumatic than others.
Some of them just cute little frogs.
Yeah, some just a frog. Some of them just being like, oh my God, just like a flower being devoured by a caterpillar, and it says on it, a canker. Like, I
just love her labeling system. It's really, really, really.
It's true. It's true. It's so good. And I talk about this, like, again, I'm just like teasing this episode that's coming, but it was one of the first things I recorded is my chat with Claire Hunter, who she describes in her book, and we talk in the episode that's coming up later, next week actually, about how Mary and Bess had this like vision. So they were both making these little embroideries, and their plan was to make this big embroidery comprised of little embroideries. And like the spy shit, like they were all allegorical, drawn like images. And the order that they put them in would like mean something. And we don't know what order they were supposed to be in. Now we just have them. But like the two of them were putting together this like really smart, interesting, meaningful thing. Like it's really, they're this magnum opus they were working on.
Yeah, like a quilt code kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like the code of it all, like it's really, again, it's just like show some respect to embroidery, the world. Like it's so interesting.
And because Mary couldn't do anything without making it into a scheme. Like every single thing, she's like, I really enjoy embroidery. What if I combined it with my only other passion? Schemes.
Exactly. So this is years. Like she and Bess are just sitting around, like they're stitching. There's one quote I read that Mary wrote that she basically would embroider until the pain made her stop. Like that embroidery, the cat, it has something like 10,000 stitches in it. Like she was like, this is so much time and effort went into this. But she's spending this time with Bess, and Bess knows stuff about Elizabeth because she'd been a lady in waiting for Elizabeth. So Mary's like, tell me more about Elizabeth. Oh, that's interesting. So she's like learning stuff. She knows like, oh, Elizabeth likes red skirts with embroidered thistles. Interesting. Like she's just like learning stuff as well. Meanwhile, the Bess and Mr. Bess marriage continues to break down because of everything. Bess did accuse Mr. Bess of having an affair with Mary. In fact, she told Elizabeth that this was happening in retaliation because no one spreads a rumor about Mary without Mary like making an opposing accusation.
Immediately.
Yeah. So Mary wrote to Elizabeth being like, oh, well, you know what? Here's what Bess told me about you and how much sex you're having in the back door with Bobby Duds or whatever to sort of slander Bess. So this letter exists. The letter being like, well, here's all the shit Bess said about you. Such a letter is never recorded as being received by Elizabeth, but Cecil had it in his files. So
he was like,
sent it.
Absolutely the fuck not. Will I pass that along?
Pretty much, yeah. So part of Mary's ongoing, just like everything, is like she hadn't seen her son. I didn't say this. Every book mentions the last time she saw her son, James, he was 10 months old. She went to visit him and then she was kidnapped by Bothwell. And now here we all are. Every single book mentions when she sees him. And this was the last time she saw her son. I didn't want to say that in the podcast because there's a lot of people who don't know the story. But that was the last time she saw her son. She saw him when he was 10 months old. It's now been like 10 years or something. Like she has not seen him. She's not allowed to communicate with him. This is really hard for her.
He's a whole human person that she has essentially never met. He's a baby. He has not developed a personality yet. She has no idea.
And he's being raised by Allison, George Buchanan, the writer of the erotic fan fiction. Like, that's who he's with. He's like, if you watch the Doctor Who episode where Alan Cumming plays adult James, it's the best. Lana agrees. It's the best casting. It's just like bisexual realness, but Scottish person. But the trauma he shows in this kind of like whimsical episode of just like how he was raised to hate his mother and how he absorbed that and how that transfers into a hatred and mistrust of women and people. Like it's real. Like this is like the root of some, like the King James Bible would perhaps be very different had Mary raised him.
All of the witch panics of the 1700s. Like this is the whole thing.
Yeah. No,
Thanks,
it's a real
George Buchanan.
So he's being raised there. Mary is sending letters and gifts, including hand-embroidered items, a book of poems in her own handwriting. She had different gifts she wanted to send him, little toy guns and things, and just like none of them were sent to him.
Toy guns, like the one he used to kill my brother.
She also, notably, so she created in her like embroidery frenzy, a set of bed hangings that basically tell the story of their family tree and of her life and of his life. So it's got the emblems of the royal dynasties that they are both connected to, the house, like Guise, the Valois, the Stuart, Lorraine, along with, in her way, like she's doing spy shit. She's embroidering with these like meaningful images where you're just like, oh, look, a cat. But then you learn like what it means. So these hangings also have like her experience of captivity was illustrated through illustrations of a bird in a cage, a lion in a net, a porcupine among sea rocks, or on a more hopeful theme, an apple tree growing on a thorn with the motto, her cause increased by captivity. I love her inclusion of little, like really meaningful phrases with images. Like she's really got an eye. Anyway, so through all of this, Like, this is all happening. She's scheming. She's doing all this stuff. But like, again, like check in with her various health issues. So like, she's not thriving mentally or physically. She's not allowed to move. She can't go outside. Like mentally, she's been going through it for several years. Her hair was turning gray with stress and illness. She had it cut off to try and help her headaches. Like maybe her hair was hurting her head. Mary Seton worked her magic with wigs and stuff.
I love Mary Seton.
Mary Seton is like, I love that Mary Seton was there for her. When we get down to talking about the supporting performance, like Mary Seton.
She's been there since France, right?
Yeah. Since they were little girls. Yeah. And she's just like crimping her hair, making wigs, like making outfits, like ordering fabric. Like she knows that this is like, it's a shitty situation, but these little things help Mary, right? And Mary Seton is there.
Yeah, make you feel like a person.
Yeah, like Mary loves fashion. She loves looks. It's like making her feel good about how she looks is going to help her a little bit. She had fainting fits, terrible headaches, fatigue, stomach pains from the gastric ulcer situation. Okay, so right now, again, I put down numbers where I could. So 1575. She's been held up in various English stately homes now for 7 years. She's 32 years old. She has built up a menagerie of pets, including turtle doves and Barbary fowls. She wrote, besides knitting and sewing, my only pleasure is getting all the little beasts I can find.
No, relatable.
And I think you see also like how many animals she embroiders. Like she clearly is an animal lover. She likes to have them around her as well. Little dogs, Allison.
I love Mary's little dogs.
Where, just remember she's little dogs. That comes up later.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's described as her rich diet, which I would describe as 16 course meals 3 times a day. This was not good for her various stomach problems.
No.
Eating all this really rich food all the time. There's potentially stress-related irritable bowel syndrome. Like we just know what her symptoms are from her writings and from the doctors. She had terrible insomnia, throwing up a lot. She did have 2 doctors there all the time. She wore, I mentioned this before, she has an amethyst ring that she wore for healing purposes. It was supposed to help with her diverse melancholies. She begged her ambassador in Paris for a unicorn's horn as a remedy, which at this point, weren't they from narwhals, maybe?
I think so. I don't know where, it could be from a rhinocodon or whatever she thought.
Rhinoceros.
Thank you.
Anyway, Mary believed her illness was due to her broken heart. She wrote, no one can cure this malady as well as the Queen of England. And that's the broken heart that she describes, that Elizabeth was not helping her.
And she's not wrong in that way. Because like everything that's happening to her is, you know, it is physical, but she's only in this physical situation because Elizabeth is keeping her here. Like,
yes, exactly.
It's not being overly emotional. She's like, this is Elizabeth's fault why I'm like this.
It is. Anyway, so she asked to be allowed to take the waters, like another recurring theme of this podcast this season, bath, people who like baths. Anyway, take the waters in Buxton. British listeners, tell me, is that still a place you can go? Like, she's not going to Bath itself, but like Buxton is a place with hot springs or something. And Mr. and Mrs. Best actually had a house built there, so she could go there and just like hang out at the spa. And she went there numerous times over the years. Some thought she exaggerated her symptoms so she could go there more. And honestly, maybe she did. Fuck you. Like,
if she did, good for her.
I would too. Like, anyway, so Buxton, it seems like, but similar to Bath, like where it's just like other aristocrats and nobles would go there. Like she would like visit, people would go there because they knew she was there. Like the same way it's like, oh, I heard there's a celebrity staying in this spa. And so then like normal people would go there to try and catch a glimpse of her. Like she's still very famous. Mm-hmm. Bobby Duds would show up. Like, Bobby Duds, what is your life? What? Like, I don't know. I don't, against, not on purpose. I know a lot about the Kardashians because I exist in the world. But yeah. Bobby Duds is giving me like a Scott Disick vibe. It's just like, why are you always around? Why are you here?
What are you adding to this picture?
Who why are you? Why are you here? Yeah, it's just like, you're here? Okay. Anyway, so her private secretary died, and she arranged to get a new private secretary. And actually, some of the Diggy's Next Generation helped her out with this. They got this French guy whose name was Claude Nau de la Boisselière. He was French with connections to France, and it's like, and so he was able to help her with a super secret, sexy network of people sending letters back and forth to the French ambassador.
How did he get in there?
Exactly. And he got in there because the De Guises somehow gave him this it's like ambassador status or something, where he was like officially a diplomat. Like he went to England as a diplomat, and then because he was a diplomat, they couldn't be suspicious of him or something like that.
Because he had like diplomatic immunity, so he couldn't get arrested. It was like him running into the embassy and being like, I can commit any crime I want.
So he came. So Claude now, great to have him on board. This is great.
Also, I love that you clarified for me that he was French and had connections to France after you said his name, which, by the way...
His name, which was not James Stewart. Yeah.
His name, which was... Can you say it one more time for me, please?
Claude Now de la Boisselière.
That man is French?
Yeah, he's French. Surprise.
Huh. Who knew?
Okay, so now 1578. She's been there now for 10 years. This year, Bothwell dies in the dungeon in Denmark. In England... Lady Mary Grey dies in England, and with her, the whole Grey family sisters claimed the throne, leaving, from that side of things, who is the new threat to the throne? Ferdinando Stanley, Lord Strange, who is also in Allison's book. Anyway, the same year, more importantly to this story, in Scotland, Jeremy Jam from Parks and Recreation was forced to resign as regent because the asshole lords turned on him because they just keep eating their own.
They cannot hold their shit together, these asshole lords. They get got 2 years in his max, then we have to shake everything up.
And so he resigned, and then so BJ, who King James the 6th of Scotland, is 11 years old, and he's just like, fuck all of y'all. I don't need a regent.
I'll do it myself.
I avenge my cause, oh Lord. Like, he is taking over. Like, this was his final regent. He's just like, I can do this better than you adults, clearly, so fuck off.
He was not wrong.
Meanwhile, in England, Bobby Duds had a super secret sexy marriage to Lettice Knowles, which annoys Elizabeth.
Yes.
Understandably. I think around this same time, the truth about his Douglas Sheffield, his child, Robert Dudley had 3 to 4 children, all called Robert.
Each of them with a different secret wife, right?
Yep.
Because he's had at least 2 wives.
He was with Amy Dudley, and then she died. They didn't have children. Then he was Douglas Sheffield, and they had Robert Dudley. Lettice Knowles, I think, already had a son called Robert, who was Robert Devereux, other dirtbag for another day. Then Lettice and Bobby Duds have his son, who they also call Robert. So he's just having kids. I'll call Robert is what he's doing.
Can you imagine? You're like, oh, I have one stepson whose name is Robert. What should I name my next son? Robert. Definitely. So there's 3 of us. That's going to be not confusing in any way. That's why when Anne was trying to make a reference to one of these Roberts to me earlier today, I was like, wait, not that one. Wait, no. And I had to Google it to remember which frickin' Robert is the right Robert.
This same year, also, speaking of Ferdinando Stanley, 1578, this is the year that the only male heir from the Grey, from the Mary Tudor side of things, who is a Catholic and also a man, which is why he's not the king, marries Alice Spencer, who we talked about in that book a while ago. So I just wanted to mention all these things because it's people we've talked about before in the podcast, Tudor era is just going on, and Mary is just in this place making depressing embroideries, writing spy shit, letters, time is passing. So this is the first year covered by the recently deciphered letters. The letters are mainly, most of the letters, they were sent from Mary to Michel de Castelnau. So not the other guy, not Claude Now. This is Michel de Castelnau, also a French person who is the French ambassador to England. So she was sending letters to him. This is where they were found. They're in his personal files is where these letters came from, the ciphered letters. So some of these letters discuss things like Arbella Stewart, who is at this point just a little baby. But so Mary is just reporting on everything that's going on in this house and that she hears about. She's like, hey, Castelnau, this is the guy she's writing to. She's like, I just heard this and this and this. Tell Elizabeth that this scheme is happening, but don't tell her you heard it from me. Mary is got her finger on the pulse of everything. Part of what was happening is that Bobby Duds was trying to get his son, one of the Roberts, married to Arbella Stewart to try to make himself be grandfather of the king or whatever.
Come on, man. What are you doing?
What is happening?
Bobby Duds needs to I don't know what he's doing, but he's doing it incorrectly at every turn.
I don't even know.
Very frustrating because I always picture him as being played by Jeremy Irons, so I want him to be on top of things, but he is just this guy. So.
No, who I picture him being played by is Joseph Fiennes, who played him in the Cate Blanchett movie.
Mm.
And that goes along with this kind of like himbo dumbass vibe.
Yes. Yeah, that tracks.
But yeah, so I think in the one letter, Mary is just like, hey, so Bobby Duds is trying to get his son married to Arbella Stewart so she can become the next queen. It's like, tell Elizabeth that her boyfriend is fucking around, but don't tell her I told you, because then people would know that Mary was writing to Castleknock. And so there's a whole thing where there's the official channel where she would write to the ambassador being like, dear Mr. Ambassador, thank you for doing ambassador-like things. So there's like official letters, but then there's these secret letters in cipher. So anyway, she wrote also about Walsingham. She described him as being cunning. Like, it's like he tries to act like he's nice and your friend, but he's not really. She's like, don't trust him, Castleknock. And then in this same year, eventful year, 1578, this is like, I can't not tell you the story. So 1578, a man named Esme Stewart arrived in Scotland.
And Esme. This is new.
Esme is a name I've encountered twice before now, both in fiction. One of them is Esme is the mother of the vampire family in Twilight, Esme Cullen. That's why Bella's daughter is called Renesmee. And then Esme is a character in in the Lemony Snicket series.
I was going to say, the series of unfortunate events. That's where I first learned this name.
I know, but this is Esme man version. So the Wikipedia entry about Esme Stewart, which I did consult to just be like, who is he? Does say like he popularized the name Esme, and I'm like, not very well, because I've never encountered anyone else called Esme in Scottish history. Okay, so Esme Stewart. This, I promise, all leads back to Mary. But she writes about this, so I had to learn about it. So Esme Stewart was a cousin of Darnley's, like surname Stewart. So he's also tall and hot, like Darnley. He's 37 years old, an adult man, and when he arrived in Scotland, little 13-year-old bisexual baby BJ is just like, who is this tall, hot person?
Oh my God, I love that. Baby's first crush.
It's like how people claimed Mary acted when she met Darnley, but actually, like, James was like this when he met Esme. So within a few months, BJ Esme was his main advisor. He gave him titles, including he's the new Lord Darnley, which is a title, not a name. But we use it like a name.
Fucking perfect.
So he makes Esme the new Lord Darnley and also the new Earl of Lennox, which was his grandfather's title. So when Mary writes about him, she calls him the Earl of Lennox. And that's how the cryptographers are able to date one of the letters, because Esme, they know when he was named the Earl. There's just 1 July where he was the Earl. They're like, so that must be this year of this letter. So like that was how they solved that. Anyway, so the asshole lords, very much still on the scene. In Scotland, they're upset about this because they didn't want anyone else influencing him other than them. Also, Esme used to be Catholic, but had converted to be Protestant. But they were like, he used to be Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's just a bunch of guys named James signing documents, being chaotic. At one point, they were threatening Esme to the point that Esme and 24 of his armed followers had to barricade themselves overnight against the asshole lords, who I guess were like, but we have the paperwork. We're going to murder you or whatever.
It was old as time.
Meanwhile, BJ, giving Esme jewels he had inherited from his mother. I don't know if it's the turtle, but I feel like if that was there, he'd be like, I understand that this turtle jewel has significance. Esme, you are my Rizzio.
Be my turtle.
Yeah. So then, a new Scottish man. This is like the years are passing by and titles are being inherited by different people. So I was doing so much. It's like, is this the same guy? No, it's his son. So a new guy called James Stewart, not Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart.
Another fucking James Stewart in this.
Some other guy from some other branch of the family. Anyway, he publicly accused, so Councilman Jeremy Jam is still around. He's just not the regent anymore. But this guy, other James Stewart, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart wearing a mustache in disguise, I don't know. He publicly accused Jeremy Jam of having been involved in the Darnley murder. Like he said this in Parliament or something. So Jeremy Jam was arrested and taken into custody, where it's like, despite the fact that like everyone here was complicit in the Darnley murder.
Y'all did this. Every single one of you.
Probably this other James Stewart too. Anyway, so later he confessed that Bothwell had told him about the plan, but Jeremy Jam swore he hadn't been personally involved. But he was found guilty and was executed by an early version of the guillotine called the Maiden. So, you know what? Like, farewell, Jeremy Jam. You just, like, everything was a disaster, and he just made everything worse at every turn. He was truly like Councilman Jeremy Jam on Parks and Rec, was his vibe.
He did not help in any way. We will not miss him.
I do appreciate, well, I messaged Lana when I was reading some of this stuff. I was like, it's gratifying to me that anyone who was like against Mary ends up being murdered or executed, like, pretty quickly. It's like, that's good. And Lana was like, yeah, but people who were friends of her also were. And I was like, true.
Yeah. Anybody who was near her got killed.
The only person in this entire saga who was not seemingly cursed is Jean Gordon and Scott DeFru and Anna Tronson.
They escaped.
Jean Gordon lived a long life and did not die, but kind of everyone else did, which just speaks to the chaos of it all. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm telling you all this because things in Scott. So Esme shows up, and so first of all, James is like, I'm 13, I'm in charge, don't worry about it. Esme shows up, and he's all like, oh my God, Esme! And then he like lavishes him with jewels. The assholes are mad. Jeremy Jam, they turn on him for I don't know why. So then, 2 months later, after Jeremy Jam is executed by a proto-guillotine, a thing happened called the Raid of Ruthven, or as I believe it's pronounced, Ruthven. So you remember Lord Ruthven?
I do. Was he the man in the suit of armor?
He was like actively dying, but showed up to kill Rizzio while wearing a suit of armor.
That's the man. Never forget. A man who also loved an outfit, but not in the right way.
Yeah. So this is his son, William Ruthven, who abducted 13-year-old James. The assholes just, you know how their whole lives, Mary and James were just trying to not be kidnapped, or especially when he was a little baby, it's just like, they're going to kidnap it. So anyway, they did. They kidnapped him, and they're basically being like, stop having Esme. Your crush is ruining the country.
I understand he's very tall and very hot, but please pull it together.
Yeah.
We've all had an intervention with a friend that went something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I understand he's very tall and very hot, but please, honey, what are you doing?
Yeah. So but they're also just like, they felt that Esme represented this French connection, like Catholic, even though he wasn't Catholic anymore. They're just like, he represents French Catholicness. Like, you can't have this influence around you. They had also, maybe they were mad that Jeremy Jam had been I don't know. These guys, they never really have a reason for doing what they did. They're just like, let's sign this paperwork. Okay, I guess we're going to kidnap James now. Like, okay. And they also gave themselves a new name. Remember last time now we're called the Confederate Lords. Now they're called the Lords Enterprisers.
That's even worse.
It's like they make little membership cards, like, okay, now we're a club. But it's just like the same people.
No girls allowed. Secret Scottish asshole Lords Club. So
when they kidnapped BJ, much like his mother, he wept. He's a crier. Nothing wrong with that. And then they, like, for the next 10 months, he was moved around from castle to castle, not unlike his mother. 10 months. Did you know any of this happened? I did not.
I did not. And he's the literal king of Scotland right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you doing?
This is where it's like people are like, oh, we don't like Mary because she's Catholic and a woman. It's like, well, if she was male and Protestant, you would still mistrust them, as evidenced by this. Like, the asshole lords are just not good at running a country. Anyway, so the recently deciphered letters show Mary was understandably frantic when she heard that her son had been kidnapped by the guys who had murdered Rizzio and Darnley and ruined her life.
Notorious for murdering any man who was next to her. So, yeah.
So she's just like, oh my God, I can't believe like history is repeating. So she's writing desperately to France for help, like send French forces to rescue him. Eventually, the French king did send some forces, but she wrote she was dissatisfied, feeling that she and her son had both been abandoned by France, which they had been.
Rightly.
Out of all of this, Esme was forced into exile. He returned to France. And he had some children, including a son he called Esme. Esme Jr.
Love.
And another son called Ludovic, which, bless you, like, honestly, it's like his name is Esme. I was reading about someone else for something else, and it was like, and she married Ludovic Stewart. I was like, Ludovic Stewart? Well, there can only be one. Esme's son. And it was. So.
Yay.
That was delightful.
It's way better than Bobby Duds having 4 Roberts running around. We got an Esme and a Ludovic.
The thing with Esme is like, and I think I told you this, I'm like, is he an interesting person or is it just his name is Esme? So I assume he's interesting and I'm not sure. But I do know he was tall and hot and had some sort of sexual awakening for the young teenage king.
A real call me by your name situation. I love it.
This could be another movie. So anyway.
Call me Esme.
Okay, so in the story, so we're in the 10 months of his kidnapping, right? So initially, Elizabeth was like, I'll allow it. This is okay. Like, I support the Protestant lords. This is fine. But meanwhile, the people who opposed this included are reliable, like has been on the right side of the story all along. Coco the North Jr. is there trying to rescue the king. He's still on Mary's side. He urged the townspeople of Edinburgh, important supporting characters this whole time, to arm themselves and to seize James. But the people of Edinburgh were like, we're over that kind of business. Like, we want to be excluded from this narrative. We, the people of Edinburgh. So they did not follow up on that suggestion. Anyway, so Mary she was writing so many letters. Like, she had so many plans. She's like, okay, well, what if we rescue BJ, take him to France? What if we have the French musketeers invade? Maybe the Pope can pay for this all. Like, she's got all these plans. But honestly, all she had to do was wait because the assholes never have a plan for longevity. It just all ran out of steam, and eventually he was just freed. And the Lords Enterprisers were dismissed from court. So I wanted to include that story partially just to show this is what a lot of the Mary letters are about, but also just to show that like Scotland is still just the same. She left, but nothing has changed.
Scotland is Scotland.
Yeah, but also just this kind of partially explains some of the trauma that BJ lived through that can explain some of his various personality traits.
Some of his going on. Yeah.
God. But also I just wanted to talk about Esme because I was really excited about Esme. And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a co-founder of the Go Kid Go Network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. During her journey, Isla meets new friends, including King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and learns valuable life lessons with every quest, sword fight, and dragon ride. Positive and uplifting stories remind us all about the importance of kindness, friendship, honesty, and positivity. Join me and an all-star cast of actors, including Liam Neeson, Emily Blunt, Kristen Bell, Chris Hemsworth, among many others, in welcoming the Search for the Silver Lining podcast to the Go Kid Go Network by listening today. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. Anyway, so Elizabeth was displeased by the fall of the regime of the Lords Enterprisers because I think she's just like, these dummies will be really easy to control. Like, I'm happy with them.
Yeah.
So anyway, so then Walsingham was sent as ambassador to Scotland. He spoke with baby BJ.
I'm sure he looked at that child and was like, oh, fuck, no, absolutely not. I cannot picture two people with more opposing personalities than those two.
The Walsingham and 13-year-old James.
13-year-old super horny James who misses his boyfriend. Yeah.
Yeah. So they spoke, but I don't know if it was talking to James or just the people around James, the like adults. But Walsingham was just like, oh, Mary's influence is still really strong in Scotland. And it's kind of confusing James. Like he's not sure who to trust. And has PTSD.
I'm sure.
And is traumatized, I'm sure. Anyway. But this visit really made Walsingham just really cement in his mind that, like, Mary has to die. He wrote to Elizabeth that Mary, though she cannot live many years due to her illness, would overthrow James. Just because, yeah, so what he saw was just like in Scotland, like people were more loyal to Mary than to James, basically. Like if she came back, they would be cool with her being queen again, which is not what they want. Oh, yeah, and we'll hear some details about this meeting that you can't quite imagine. Apparently, Walsingham found James unable to take his complaint seriously. James laughed at Walsingham. He told Walsingham that he was an absolute king who would order his subjects as he would. Anyway, so he's just like, I got this, Walsingham. Like, can you imagine?
What I'm hearing is this is young Simba and Zazu trying to have a conversation. It's just like, I'm king. I get to do whatever I want. And Walsingham is like, if you go in the elephant graveyard, go fuck yourself. I'm going home. Like,
that's
incredible.
exactly the vibe. Oh, okay. And then some guys hired a woman called Kate the Witch to to disrupt Walsingham's visit. So they paid her £6 and a length of plaid cloth for her to stand outside the royal palace and just complain, just yell to voice complaints. Kate the Witch, an icon.
God, that's I did not know about Kate the Witch. That's incredible.
I love that Walsingham went to Scotland and he just sees like 13-year-old James outside Kate the Witch is just being like, boo, like in Princess Bride.
He turns around to his servants. He's like, on second thought, let's not go to Scotland. It's a silly place.
Yeah. So anyway, Mary, meanwhile, still, going through it. She wrote in ciphered letters how she was willing to give up claims of succession to the English throne if she was permitted to return to Scotland. So this is, at this point, she's offering a compromise. That she and BJ could rule together, like in an association. That this is her offer. She also writes in these secret unciphered letters about how unpleasant her conditions are in captivity. Yes, living in a swamp house, being sick, not being allowed outside. She had lots of requests to try to improve her situation. She also wanted to ensure that her servants and allies were financially rewarded. And this has always been her thing. She likes to offer financial rewards to people. She's a good tipper, basically. She likes
to pay for the weddings of people who give her good service. So.
Yeah, and this is a way that she gets people to support her. She suggests various people who could maybe be enticed to switch to her side if they were bribed enough. She asks for Castelnau's help in recruiting new spies and courtiers, while warning him, rightly, that some people working for her might be Walsingham's secret agents.
Yes. Many of them, in fact.
People working for her are Walsingham's secret agents.
Because all of her staff has to come with Elizabeth's approval. And so who is Elizabeth going to send? Walsingham's like, okay, 14 guys. And one of them can do codes, and one of them is really good at listening through doors, and let's just send them all and see what we can find out.
Well, and at this point, most of her people she knew, like her servants are mostly strangers. And I think at this point, they're forbidden from talking to her or something. So I think Barry Seaton is still there. Young Willie may or may not be. But like, they don't want her to have people around her who she trusts and who she knows. Because
they know if she has people around who she can trust, then she's going to get secret messages out and she's going to go find an army somewhere because she can.
There's this sweet moment in one of the letters where she writes to Castelnau, thanking him for sending her a portrait of James, her son. She asks who was it painted by and when, because she finds it looks different from other portraits she had already received, which is just heartbreaking because she just like, what does he look like? Is this more accurate than the other one? I thought he looked like this. Like she had a little miniature of him, I think, next to her bed. Like she was really missing her son. Which
is so sweet and so sad because she doesn't know how bad he sucks. No, he took after Darnley. That makes me sad.
He's a copy-paste Darnley. It's like, what if Darnley was born King of Scotland?
What if Darnley but smaller? It's the same.
What if mini Darnley? So around the same time, this was exciting. So we learn again from Mary's letters. So she reveals in a letter that there was a close call. So what had happened was Castleknow was sloppy. He carelessly included a ciphered letter in with the regular mail. And Mr. Bess of Hardwick got the regular mail and was supposed to go through it to make sure it was all on the up and up. So, but he was just over it and he didn't inspect it. So he didn't notice the ciphered letter was there. But Mary was just like, watch your shit, Castleknow, Jesus Christ. Which is like an exciting, in the spy movie of this, would be a scene of like the letter almost being seen. But then he's just like, meh, I don't care. In September 1582, erotic fan fiction author George Buchanan died. And Mary wrote in a letter, like, please send me a copy of that erotic fan fiction. Basically, she's like, so no one else can read it. Not just because for funsies. But she's like, please
send it myself. I'm here.
Send it to me. Like, I don't want anyone else to see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it's 1583. Bear in mind, Mary has been scheming nonstop via letters this whole time. So at this point, and this is where, okay, so Ryan Philippi is great at spy deciphering stuff. And I think she would send, she's like, here's the new cipher code. And she would send that sometimes out. So it could also be at times, perhaps, Walsingham intercepted that. So it's not necessarily cracking a code. Always, like, some of it could be, oh, we got the table from somebody.
Right, because if you're sending this extremely complicated code to a person for the first time, like, how are they going to read it? Unless
you need to explain what the code is.
Yeah. But I do think she did, like, variations on it as she went. So, like, you wouldn't just give the code and then, oh, now I can read everything, no problem. Like, it was, there's still work going on there. But yeah.
So there was this letter. She wanted to deliver a cipher table to a new ally whose name was Archibald Douglas. A Douglas. So Archibald, I was confused for a minute because Archibald Douglas was the name of Margaret Tudor's shitty husband, Darnley's ancestor. But this is a different person called Archibald Douglas, who on Wikipedia calls like a notorious intriguer. So
he liked to scheme.
What we're going to call him is a Douglas. A Douglas.
Because if you write his initials, that's how he would sign letters, is a Douglas.
So she's got this new ally, a Douglas. But she needed to tell him about, here's what the table is for the cipher. This is what's so interesting about these letters. Like, she's like how things worked. So she explained, she's like, we need to get this cipher table to him, but we can't let him know that you, Castleknow, are the person getting my cipher letters. So I'm going to send this to you, but I have some servants also going to London. So basically, that she wanted to have a Douglas think that these women were the people who had brought the cipher table. Like, she wanted this to be delivered to him secretly, I guess, in his room, just after the women left. So he would think the women had brought it, but they were gone, so he couldn't ask them if they had brought it. So it's like, even the couriers couldn't know what the channel was. And this is just like to protect at all levels. And this is the level of scheming that's like, she's so on the ball. She's so thinking about it.
She's 3 steps ahead of everybody all the time.
Like, just the way that she was like, okay, I want you to deliver this letter to him, but wait until these other people are there so he thinks they brought it. But wait until those other people have left so he can't ask them. It's just like, oh my God.
And what she's delivering is the code to a secret code that she's going to send her letters in, because he can't just... This is also so she can send him a note. It's so elaborate.
It's so elaborate. And then when they get new couriers, like, and this is like in the ciphered letters, she's explaining, here's what I want you to do. Like, there's this new courier, and if you could, like, first you just get them to send like a blank piece of paper or something, like, just to see if they're trusted. Like, there's so much of, like, it's not just like, hey, great, you're my new courier, let's do it. Like, there's so many tests and making sure people are okay. So according to a contemporary source, a Douglas was playing the double part of betraying Mary to Walsingham and pretending to betray Walsingham to Mary. So like a Douglas, like everybody, playing both sides. Anyway, so 1583, this is the year Walsingham was finally able to infiltrate the Mary Castleknow communication channel by recruiting a spy at the French embassy. So what's also interesting about these newly ciphered letters is that we knew that at this point, 1583, we knew that the secret channel was in place, but these letters prove the secret channel had been in place since 1578, which was not previously known. So this was working without Walsingham knowing about it for several years.
5 years.
Yeah. Which shows how good she is. Anyway, so this brings us to Francis Throckmorton and the Throckmorton plot. So we did have a Throckmorton earlier. We had Throcko, who was the one who was smuggling letters to Mary and Lochleven in the scabbard of his sword or whatever.
And I said to you tellingly, isn't that guy suspicious? And what I meant was, this guy is suspicious. The other Throckmorton.
Yes. So this is Francis Throckmorton. So he is related to Throcko from before. He's like his nephew or something. Not his son, but same family. Anyway. So this Throcko 2.0 is a young man. And this is where we're getting, it's like the years are passing. So Mary's supporters are now kind of like dumbass 20-year-olds is kind of who her main supporters are at this point.
Yes. And that goes as well as you think it will.
Yeah. Yeah. So Throcko is this young man, Throcko 2.0. He was traveling in Paris, and while he was there, he met some Catholic Mary supporters, and he was like, you know what? Yeah, that all makes sense. So he's like, I'm going to go back to England, and I'm going to be a secret spy for Mary, because great. So he started working as a courier for her super secret letters through the French embassy. The deciphered letters show her mentioning him as a trusted courier, but does not contain any details about any plot, but just he's a guy that she knew about. So I mentioned that to say, like, he's got a plot, but Mary didn't know about the plot. He's just, this is like a paragraph. Okay. So right away, Throcko 2.0 starts being a courier. The mole at the French embassy told Walsingham, and then Throcko was taken into custody basically right away. He was actually caught in the act of encoding a letter to Mary, Queen of Scots when he was arrested.
Does he have one letter normally that just says, this is a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, and then a half-completed code on the table next to him, and then someone opens the door and is like, what are you doing?
He's not.
Man.
So after his arrest, Mary did write in a ciphered letter. She was mad at how he was being treated badly. He was suffering upon his arrest because he was a trusted courier. So he's taken to the Tower of London, and another conspirator was also arrested and questioned, but released after making a deal with Walsingham. Like, Walsingham was just turning everybody. So what the Throckmorton plot was, so Throcko had sent a casket. I don't know why it's always called a casket in the story, like it's a parcel.
Yeah.
It's like not a little tiny coffin, but that's what I picture. He had sent some documents to the Spanish ambassador. And basically, he was a minor player. He had been manipulated into doing this, and the significance of him was to confirm the extent of the Spanish involvement in seeking to overthrow Elizabeth. So he didn't really have... This is called the Throckmorton plot, but it's just kind of like Throckmorton is a dumbass, is what happened.
It's the Throckmorton got caught plot.
He wasn't Throckmorton really is... Yeah.
But he does have the most memorable name of anyone involved in this plot, so I understand why they did that.
I understand. Yeah, no, Throckmorton is a great name. But still... Mary and her allies, like, they were on their shit. So even after Throcko 2.0 was arrested, another guy was able to carry Mary's confidential letters for like another year after this, like without being caught. Like, so she's still on it.
She did not stop for a second. She's like, okay, I'll find another guy. Don't worry.
Got a new courier. We're good. So Throcko 2.0 confessed after being tortured, was put on trial, and was executed. But him being arrested for plotting, quote unquote, this is where things really start to be like, are people plotting, or is Walsingham just making them look like they're plotting so that he can get shit done? And it's kind of both.
Mm-hmm. I think he's erring on the side of let's assume they're plotting. I don't know that it's that he's planting information necessarily, but I think he's just like, this person, there's a 33% chance that this person is guilty, so I'm going to have them executed just to make sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's to his benefit, because the more people are plotting, the more they can put more strict rules around Mary, making her life more uncomfortable, which could make her more desperate, because ultimately Cecil and Walsingham want to entrap her in treason, and they need to get her psychologically to a place where she'll mess up. That's what they're doing. It's a long game. Anyway, so this all happened. Castle know, like, they found out that he was getting these letters, so he was confronted, and he promised Walsingham he would show him all the letters to and from Mary. But just before making this promise, he had sent Mary a packet containing a bunch of letters that had been piling up recently. So he's like, I'll let you see all the letters except for these 50 that I just sent her.
All the ones that I will send starting today.
Yeah. And then he was sent back to France, Castelnau. So most of the letters that were found were from this Castelnau era, from 1578 to 1584, basically. And then he was replaced by a new French ambassador, but Mary does not seem to have been sending him secret letters. She had some other new plans. Yeah, so at this point, Walsingham and Cecil made up another one of these like wild rules. So it's called the Bond of Association. So it just says everyone who signs this thing, it's their version of the like Ainsley's Tavern Bond. They're like, okay, let's do some paperwork.
They're signing the paper.
Scotland style. So just everyone who signs this letter agrees to execute anyone who tries to usurp the throne or assassinate Queen Elizabeth. Mary herself even signed it. She was like, sounds good to me. I don't know. It's just all furthering just entrapping her, basically.
Yeah.
So time continues on. Now it's February 1585. At what point does your book start?
1585.
Okay. Because like Tony Babs is going to be on the scene shortly, and that's kind of where your book is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So time continues on. February 1585. Bess and Mr. Bess are officially now estranged. Like Elizabeth tries to do
they've
some
been stuck in like dating in prison for 12 years, right? Like this is not helping anybody.
No. So I think Elizabeth tries to get them to come together, and they're just like, no. Like this marriage is ended forever. Thank you. So just like emotionally, everyone's worn out. And then another dumbass is caught doing another badly thought out scheme. This time it's a guy called William Parry. So he had been working for Cecil to spy on the Catholics, but then he switched over being among the Catholics. He decided to switch to the Catholic side, which is like in the first Fast and Furious movie, where the person is just like won over by the other side and switches teams. So he became a double agent like everybody. He sought approval for an assassination scheme. So he was in France and Italy. Just, I don't know, approval? Just being, hi, do you approve of me?
Right. That's wild. Like, hi, if I assassinate someone, will we all be cool with that? Like, bro, why you asking permission?
That's ridiculous. So what's crazy is, like, when I was researching this, I'm like, I knew about the Rodolphi plot, and I knew about the Babington plot, which we're going to get to. But a couple of people mentioned the Throckmorton plot and the Parry plot. And I was like, what are those? And I had to dig around a bit to find them because it's like, oh, they're not plots. It's just dumbasses. It's just two dumbasses. There's not really much to it. So he returned to England. This is wild. So part of why he was doing this was because he had a lot of debts. And I think he realized that if he became a double agent, he could like make more money, I guess, being paid by both sides.
Yes, that seems high risk for that.
So he came to England and he came clean and he was like, hey, so I was going around being a double agent trying to assassinate you, Elizabeth. And she was like, and he's like, but it's just because I'm in debt. And she's like, great. Here's a pension and a seat in Parliament for you, William Parry.
Wild move.
But he still had lots of debts. And so he wanted to make a false plot so he could look like a hero, like a false flag operation, literally. So he approached some other guy and suggested to him that they should ride up and shoot the queen in her coach or kill her during a private audience. Because he wanted to
be able to stop it so it could look like, oh, look, I saved you from this thing that I...
Yeah, please give me money to pay off my debts some more. The other guy, unsurprisingly, told on him. Parry was expelled from Parliament, taken to the Tower of London, and then was executed for just being an idiot.
What a dumbass.
What are you doing? It's just, So the connection to Mary Queen of Scots with this is that Castleknock was alleged to have carried letters to Parry. So this led to the suspicion that Mary Queen of Scots was involved in any of this stuff, which is like, no, this guy was just freelance wildcard dummy. Like,
it's just a wackadoodle man. Like, she would have chosen better.
No. So anyway, so it's kind of like how it's like Mary had done some banking with Rodolphi. It's like, I don't know. Anyway. So it's like, does that make her... But this isn't the like definite proof that Cecil needs, right? Mm. So at around this time, after 14 years, Mr. and Mrs. Bess were relieved of their duties and were no longer having to babysit Mary, Queen of Scots, anymore. Good news for them, but bad news for Mary, because her new babysitter was a Puritan asshole named Amias Paulet.
What a name!
Who sucks. So he was a Puritan. He's kind of like it's a bit John Knox vibes. He's very anti-Catholic, very anti-woman. He had previously served as one of Elizabeth's privy councillors. He had zero tolerance for Mary's womanly emotions. He had no tolerance for her Catholic faith. This is kind of why he had been chosen. Because again, this kind of like Cecil and Walsingham were just like, let's psychologically break this woman. Like, how can we do this?
Easiest way is to go get her own John Knox and send him.
We know that was distressing to her before. So he... Like, whereas, like, Letitia's dad and then Mr. Best, like they had sort of been like, okay, Mary, you can like, they followed the rules, but like they let her get away with some stuff. But Amias Paulet was just like, I picture the guy, I don't know the name of the actor, but he was in Game of Thrones and he was like the gross dad of the women and he like had babies with all his daughters. And in the Harry Potter movies, he played like the janitor.
Oh,
do you know that guy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, I picture that guy. Just like, I'm sure that guy as a person, I don't know anything about him as a person, but the roles he plays are all just this like greasy, unpleasant grosso. And that's just who I imagine.
David Bradley, who is extremely good at what he does, which is
David
unsettling
Bradley.
on screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So just put him in some like Puritan clothes and that's who this is. So Mary was forbidden to give money to the poor. She was forbidden to tip her household staff. And, you know, giving gifts was her love language, but also a way she got people to be on her side, which is why it was forbidden. But this like upset her. And then they also isolated her of communication from the outside world. She was not allowed to give or receive any letters to or from anyone because they wanted her to become desperate for information. They wanted her to become foolish. They wanted her to become reckless so they could lure her into an incriminating plot and then have official proof so they could execute her. And so Cecil knew Mary was vulnerable when stressed. So Paulette's job was to make sure that she was stressed constantly. Yeah. So Mary by now, like, you know, the years are passing. Like there's so many points in the story. I was like, oh my God, she's only 24? Jesus Christ. But now like time is passing. She's now 41. She's been in prison since she was 25. Her physical health continues to decline. Paulette wrote, the queen has kept to her bed 6 to 7 days, being very much grieved with ache in her limbs, so as she is not able to move in her bed without great help, and when she is moved, endures great pain. So her health is suffering, mentally she's suffering. He didn't care.
He sucks so bad.
I think he told her it's like, if you weren't Catholic, you wouldn't be sick now, basically. Oh yeah, I told her that the passionate and discontented mind did more to increase her sickness than the coldness of this house or any other thing whatsoever.
Hey, fuck you, man.
Because he
what
is,
the hell?
I think she's back in the swamp house, but I'm not sure.
I think it's still Sheffield, right?
No, you're right. She's in Sheffield. So she's not in the swamp house. She's not in Tetbury. Because Sheffield, that's where your book, the Mary parts, take place.
Mm-hmm. About half of it.
Yeah.
Because she's still bouncing around castles at this point. So we still have a couple more. Surprise, new house. But
yeah. So also, at this point, Mary Seton left her service, like she was allowed to leave. She went to retire to a French convent. So even who's doing her wigs, I don't even know. Mentally and physically fragile. And so by now her son, BJ, is now 20 years old.
Which is insane that she hasn't seen him in 20 years. And he is now a full-grown adult.
Yeah.
That's just so crazy.
It's wild, yeah. So there had been the sort of idea that maybe the two of them could rule jointly, but he had been raised to hate her. So of course he didn't want to do that. He chose instead to ally with Elizabeth, and this broke Mary's heart because she was kind of at this point when she knew Elizabeth wasn't going to help her, like the T-Dog, like that's all years in the past. But she was kind of being like, okay, I'm just going to wait until my son is an adult and then he will rescue me.
He's the last hope that she has, really. Like someone's going to come and help. It'll be James. It was...
No. And also Elizabeth, like James had been raised to hate Mary and to think she had killed Darnley and that she was a whore and etc. But also Elizabeth had bought his loyalty with money and also the vague promise that he would be her heir. So he sacrificed Mary to improve his chances of becoming King of England next. Mary wrote to Elizabeth, I am so grievously offended at my heart at the impiety and ingratitude that my child has been constrained to commit against me. And her household staff had decreased because Amias Paulet was not going to pay Mr. Best's levels of money to keep her living. I'm guessing there's no more 16-course meals. So she's just at like the betrayal she felt at what James did. Like it was quite a period of time where she's just with Amias Paulet, not able to do anything. And then James betrays her. So she's at like emotionally, physically a really low point, which is where Cecil and Walsingham wanted her because that would make her desperate and willing to go along with a plot that previously she might have thought was pretty stupid. Which brings us to Tony Babs, Anthony Babington. So, to recap from last time. So at age 10, he had become a ward to Mr. Best, and he'd been a page in that household. So he met Mary. Then he went, or do you want to, What do you know about him? Tell us. Tony Babs is in your book. What do you know about him?
I know him mostly in the context of the plot, but he is a nobleman of like medium quality. He's not like particularly powerful. He was came through as a page in the house, and then he's kind of making his way in the world. He's not destitute, but he's not like a rich and powerful person who is really helpful to have on your side necessarily.
He's also played in the movie Elizabeth: The Golden Age by Eddie Redmayne. So that's who I picture.
You can picture Eddie Redmayne. That's also the vibes there are pretty correct.
If you picture 20 years ago Eddie Redmayne, like just really baby twink Eddie Redmayne is who he is to me. Which was interesting because when I was starting to read about the plots, I was like, I remember in Elizabeth: The Golden Age, Eddie Redmayne is in that movie playing someone who points a gun at Elizabeth. And I was like, oh, was that William Perry? Who is that? And I'm like, oh, that's Anthony Babington. Like they took a real shortcut there in terms of the Babington plot.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't think Anthony Babington ever came at Elizabeth with a gun. It doesn't seem.
But yeah, baby Eddie Redmayne. So Tony Babs. So he, after kind of spending some time in the household of Bess and Mr. Best, he went to France and then started working. It seems like anytime anyone goes to France, they start becoming a double agent working for Mary. France as a country, very persuasive.
Honestly, that is sort of what happened. Like there were lots of like convents and seminaries and stuff set up in like North France, which was like the training ground for people who wanted to get their Catholic faith together and then come over and then start like plotting against Elizabeth. It really was like, here's where we launch all of our spies from. And so Walsingham knew that, and he had agents in those little French towns, which were like all of these suspicious places. He's like, I need y'all to pretend to be Catholics, to pretend to be double agents. So what you're really doing is being a triple agent, and just let me know who I shouldn't trust.
Oh my gosh. Well, also the Eddie Redmayne of it all and what you just described and just his kind of like young idealism reminds me of Eddie Redmayne in the Les Miserables movie.
Yes,
and kind of those guys.
Exactly that.
Where they're just kind of like, we're full of idealism and we're also young and dumb and don't actually understand what we're up against. But we have idealism.
We have lots of ideas and no brains. And I'm like, okay, Eddie Redmayne, what are we doing?
Like you're going up against Walsingham and you're like, but I have heart. So Mary Queen of Scots has been imprisoned, like to emphasize, for like 18 years.
Almost more time in prison than out of prison in her life. This is...
Yeah, because she was in Scotland for 5 years. Then she went to France until she was 18. Then she ruled Scotland for like 6-7 years. And now she's been in prison for 18 years. Like this is like...
And she was in Loch Leven for a year too, right?
Yeah. So this is...
like if you add up prison time.
Basically half her life. Yeah. Yeah. So... But the amount of time that has passed is, so a new generation of Catholics forgot about how, like, if you will recall, back when she was ruling Scotland, her whole deal was she's like, it's cool to be Catholic, it's cool to be Protestant, let's just get along, no big deal, which is actually very progressive of her. And if she had jumped in there and been more like, oh, I'm Catholic, blah, like things might have gone differently, I don't know. And also, I have to say, that's what she was like in Reign. In Reign, she was just like, let's be cool Catholics and Protestants. It didn't work out. But I'm like, in terms of accuracy, like, I'm like, oh, that was what she was like. Anyway, so even when she had been the Catholic Queen of Scotland, she was like, Protestants are cool too. So much time had passed, and now Catholics were like, she is such a pure Catholic. And it's like, that's not gonna, like, she is, but they sort of...
She's a very personally devout Catholic, and they're using that to be like, and also she will be our Mary the First, and like really spread what we need and put us back in power.
They were seeing her as sort of like a still alive Catholic martyr / saint, which is kind of not who she was, but if that would help her, sure. So Tony Babs was like, okay, and remember the whole thing where the Pope was like, anyone who kills Elizabeth gets a thumbs up from me, the Pope. Yeah. So Tony Babs is like, great, like I'm going to do this thing the Pope wants. Like I've been trained in these like Les Mis roomfuls of idealistic kids. By this point, English Catholics were not doing great. So, oh my God, these fucking laws. So Cecil and Walsingham, I'm saying them and not Elizabeth because they're the ones making these laws, I think. They had made a new, she signed off on it, but this is like them.
I don't think she was like a zealous Protestant, but I do think she was like, Protestantism is correct because that's me, head of my church. And so anybody who's a Catholic is defying my authority in that way. So I think she did see it kind of as a treasonous
True.
thing if you're Catholic, because then you're not respecting me in this particular authority that I have as head of the Church of England.
One of the thing, like when there was the Northern Rebellion, she like executed all those Catholics. Like is true. She is as Protestant as Mary is Catholic. But I don't know. So when it talks about like making these laws, like I don't know if Elizabeth is thinking up these laws or if Cecil and Walsingham suggested to her and she's like, great, love it.
I do think whatever the case, she is fully on board.
She's fully on board, definitely. So the latest law that the three of them have come up with is that if anyone was found to have encouraged someone else to convert to Catholicism, that first person would be charged with treason and executed. So another sort of thought crime situation. Anyway, the Pope was like, oh, really? And so he sent a group of undercover Jesuits, which I love the phrase undercover Jesuits, just basically missionaries. So these are the guys. The Jesuits later would be involved with Ferdinando Stanley. I believe he was assassinated by Jesuits.
Possibly.
Yeah. Anyway,
there are questions involved.
Undercover Jesuits are infiltrating England, where it's now apparently treasonous to be a missionary, to be Catholic. So then Cecil and Walsingham and Elizabeth found out about the undercover Jesuits. And I feel like that's a t-shirt, but I shouldn't. No. But it would be a good band name, Undercover Jesuits.
It sure would be.
Anyway, so they passed a new law saying any Jesuits found in England would be condemned to death. So it's just like they keep doing a thing and it's like they found a loophole and then they're like, well, here's a law that's specific to that. And then
it is. They're trying to legislate their way out of revolution and it's not.
Yeah.
It's not going to.
That's not
sustainable. But okay.
But like things are just heating up. Like things are not getting better vis-a-vis Catholics versus Protestants. And Mary is just this icon, seen as this icon, not as a person. She represented this threat. So the Catholics wanted to free her so she could take over. But Elizabeth, Cecil, and Walsingham knew, like, as long as she was alive and there, that was a threat, and they had to get rid of her somehow. So we still had some leftover dummies from the Throcco plot, the Perry plot, just like lurking around, just freelance 20-year-old men who were just dummies. Like, we're a bunch of little Eddie Redmaynes, we want to do something. So Cecil and Walsingham got some of them to sign on as double agents. And one of these guys was a guy called Gilbert Gifford, which I always write as Gilbert Gottfried.
I read it the same way every time. I'm like, my God, this man.
So Gilbert Gottfried was one of these dummies. His job was to lure Tony Babs into a scheme that Walsingham and Cecil would secretly oversee to entrap Mary in treason. And so Gilbert Gottfried was given a job working for Mary's household. So he's the go-between between Tony Babs and Mary. So like Mary would give the letters to Gilbert Gottfried would give the letters to Tony Babs. Allegedly.
But in between, he would read them and pass them both and be like, okay, here's what's going on.
No, first they passed them to Ryan Philippi, who would decode them. Potentially rewrite. There's several people in between. But as far as Mary knew, Gilbert Gottfried was just sending letters directly to Tony Babs.
Right.
So she hadn't received any letters in over a year because of the janitor from Harry Potter.
The law specifically against Mary getting letters, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. So when Gilbert Gottfried showed up and he was like, hey, I'm your new household servant and I'm able to smuggle letters in and out between you and your supporters. She's like, yes, please. Because she had also been psychologically broken down and she was just trusting anyone at this point because what else?
18 years ago, Mary would have had lots more follow-up questions. But after 18 years of sitting, being unable to speak to anybody, she's like, okay, great. Let's do it.
Okay, Allison, do you want to describe or how much do you know about Gilbert Gottfried's strategy to smuggle letters inside of casks of beer?
Yes, the classic wine barrel situation, which I've always had such a hard time picturing this in my brain. Don't the letters get wet? Sneaking them into the casings of wine barrels and sending them out to Babington's house, I believe, right?
Yeah, I said at the beginning of my references, but A Tip for the Hangman was one of my sources for this episode. And I think you said in the back in your author's note, you're like, I'm really sad I couldn't involve the wine barrels smuggling. And I was like, ooh, Allison knows about the wine barrel smuggling. I'll have to ask her about that. But I was looking at diagrams of casks, of barrels, because they're they put it in this thing. And I'm like, the what thing? So it's somehow, you've got a barrel and it has a cork sort of thing that goes in it. You fill the barrel through this hole in the barrel. Then you put a cork in it. And somehow they were wrapping the letters around where that cork part goes, like where that hole is.
It seems like that would still get it wet with wine, though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
right?
I'm imagining there's an elaborate packing situation that
Unless there's something like
have
the
a hard
cork.
time visualizing.
If the cork is hollow and you put the letter in, I don't know.
Then you'd have to make sure the barrel never tilts like in any direction, like this side up for sure.
Here's how I copied it down, how somebody described it. So the letters were wrapped around the bung, B-U-N-G, which is the cork that fills up the bung hole, which is where the beer or wine is poured into. Like, what? Anyway, so it's just like, how is this happening? But the thing is that the brewer was also working for Walsingham and was in on this. So,
because every single person in England was working for Walsingham at this time. It's like, everybody.
Yeah. But the reason why like they're getting wine and beer deliveries is because that is what people drank then. There was actually a nice thing where
the water was poison.
Yeah, if you don't want to die of dysentery, here's what you do. There was, back when she's writing letters to Castleknow, there's one where she was just like, please send me some good wine. The wine here is terrible. And he did. So
I've read that Mary would actually wash her face in wine because the water was so gross. Which
she
is
did.
Like, wild. Yeah.
I read that and I forgot to put them in my notes. Like, but this is part of the cost to Mr. Bess, where it's like, did she wash her face 16 times a day with white wine? Maybe. And you had to like have enough for that because she's a queen.
I'm sorry. It seems so sticky. It seems so sticky.
It does. It does. I don't know. But you know what? Elizabeth has been like smearing lead on her face. So people just had different standards for what is comfortable or not on skin. So she's still got her French secretary. Did I mention he's French? Claude Node.
Monsieur de Lumiere, yes.
Jerry Orbach as Lumiere. So she has him as her secretary, and then also Gilbert Curl, or maybe Curly.
Different Gilbert.
Not Gilbert Gottfried, and not Gilbert, the son of Mr. Bess. Suddenly there's multiple Gilberts? What is happening? I don't know. It's a new generation. 18 years have passed. So she works with her secretaries on this new set of, she's like, oh my God, like we're writing letters again. You guys, let's make some new ciphers. And this is the cipher table that you can see on display in a museum. I'm not sure which one, but I'm sure you looked at this a lot when you're writing your book.
Yes, it is super complicated, but at the same time, I feel like if you handed me the table, I could figure it out. But if you just handed me a letter done in this cipher, I would stare at it for 1,000 years. It's like somewhere between mathematical symbols and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Like, it's really interesting to look at.
It's, at this point though, too, I will say there was, I think I was listening to a podcast where the cryptographer guys, they were talking about it, or somebody was talking about this situation, and they were saying like Mary was so trusting in the ciphers that no one would ever uncipher it. Like she was very, especially at this point where she's just like not doing great emotionally, mentally. Like she just assumed no one would ever understand these ciphers. But she had been like, I don't know, cipher technology. So it's almost like by this point, the cipher was like old fashioned. Like it was almost like Ryan Phillippe, like it was not even a challenge for him to do this anymore because Walsingham had really pushed spy shit into a new level that Mary, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, this would have been okay cipher, but now it's just like, oh no, this is.
And she hasn't had any contact with the outside world for 18 years. She doesn't know what the cool kids are doing now. She's like, this is the most sophisticated cipher that I know, so I'm going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. So Tony Babs, who is just being used, right? Like Tony Babs, like thinks he's
just
like
this absolute dummy.
He thinks he's like this hero, but really like Cecil Walsingham hired Gilbert Gottfried, who is doing this. Tony Babs doesn't realize he's like, this is a setup from the beginning. So via beer barrels, somehow, he sent all the piled up correspondence that had been waiting for her at the embassy for a year.
My man, spread it out. Be a little bit strategic. What are you doing?
So he sent her all the, like, she's just excited to get letters. So she's just like, she didn't know. And then she wrote back, like Gilbert Gottfried was taking all her letters straight to Ryan Phillippe, who would decode them, send them to Walsingham, who sent them to Cecil, who would copy them. Then they'd send them back to the embassy and send them on to who Mary had wanted to send it to. So the letters still got to where they were intended to go, but they were just intercepted by like 3 people in between.
Who are reading them out to like the entire Privy Council. Who are just like, here's all the information that everyone needs to know today. Yeah.
And so the thing with Ryan Phillippe is we talked about it before, but he's an expert forger. He could rewrite the letters. So sometimes he would just like unfold, refold them, but sometimes he could redo the letter exactly and do all the same. So he'd just recreate the letter if he couldn't. If there's some of them, it's like you write the letter and then you cut off the side and weave it in and out. So like as soon as you open it, it rips. Like you can't undo that. So he would just redo it, but he was so good. Like, what is this skill set? Wow.
How do you learn that?
Ryan Phillippe. Like, I don't know. Like, part of me is thinking like, is this some, sometimes people like with neurodivergence who can just be like so good at playing piano or so it's just like, I think Ryan Phillippe just has the knack for this. And he happened to live in a time and place and Walsingham found him where it's in today's world. If he lived now in my city, what would his job be? I don't know, but he lived there.
And his people who solve a Rubik's Cube in 3 seconds.
Yeah. And that's it. He'd just be on TikTok making money, I guess. But like, he was so perfectly suited to this task. And without him, like...
none of this could have gone.
No, like Ryan Phillippe, whose name we don't know. His name is just like Philippe. Like, we don't know his real name. But he's a star of this. Like, too bad he was on the other side, not Mary's side.
I know, but like perfect alignment of need and skill. Like,
and just Walsingham's his scouting, like finding this guy. Where did you find this guy? Was he like a street hustler? Like... doing some, was he solving some sort of like...
Like, I bet you this guy could flawlessly... I like to imagine that he was like a petty criminal in the art world or something. And they like white-collared him.
I don't know. I picture him, he's on the street doing that thing where, you put the ball under the cups and it's like, which one is it under? And they're like, that guy. Mm-hmm. I bet he could do expert forgery. But I said earlier, I think in an earlier episode, maybe last week, Mary... her handwriting could be easily copied. It wasn't weird. It was like a very standard handwriting. So it's not... Ryan Phillippe had all these skills, but I think forging Mary's handwriting was like, with the casket letters we have seen, like not hard. Like her handwriting was pretty basic. Like it's not weird. Anyway, yeah, so honestly, like just Ryan Phillippe again. So part of these codes, like again, we talked before, like you'd have the letters and a pile of letters. So which letter was on top of which letter would amplify a message. How are these in beer casks? I don't know.
Which beer cask you open first? Like,
yeah. And then for very sense, the letters, they might be stitched together in a complicated pattern. But Ryan Phillippe was able to decipher the codes, replicate what was going on, and then put them back in that same order. It's just like...
insane. Just insane.
What is happening? Okay. Anyway, so Tony Babs was tricked to think that the whole thing that we said before, it's just like... to unseat Elizabeth, you need to have like an army coming from Spain, basically, or Rome, like the Vatican. Like, so Tony Babs was tricked to think that the Spanish forces were good to go, that the English Catholics were primed and ready. And so he wrote to Mary being like, everything's in place. Oh my God, I'm like 18 years old and I'm amazing. He recruited friends to join him and then wrote Mary a long, incriminating treason letter outlining the plan.
Yes, he did. He's just like, okay, here's my treason. Let me describe it in excruciating detail.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Name all of the other people who are involved and tell you exactly what we're going to plan to do, and no one needs to worry about.
Because this cipher is so foolproof. So the plan was Tony Babs, along with 10 of his pals, would free Mary with 100 supporters at their backs. Like, I feel like the amount of armed guards around Mary is more than that.
I do feel like 100 people is not enough people, but
no.
Okay, don't know.
Meanwhile, 6 other guys, 6, would go grab Elizabeth and execute her.
That's my favorite part of the plan. 6 men. It was like me and 5 of my other bros, one of whom I think was a priest. I'm just like, what are we doing, my man? How are you going to even get in through the door?
6 guys. Like, even when the asshole lords in Scotland are doing stuff, they're like, we have 500 guys. They all sign the paper. Great. Like,
if you're going to go with 6 dudes, just at least wait till Spain shows up, because this is not going to happen.
6 guys couldn't have kidnapped 13-year-old baby BJ. Like, 6. No. Okay, so he's just like... Anyway, so this letter comes being like, hey, Mary, here's my plan, blah, blah, blah. And then her secretary, Claude Now, was like, it feels like a trap. To his credit, he's like, maybe don't reply to this letter agreeing to treason. Maybe. So she wrote back saying, like, I approve of this plan, but be careful. But this was the trap. Like, she fell into the trap. She had condoned treason by saying, I approve of this plan. To be sure, though, when this letter was like in the in-between stages, Ryan Phillippe or Walsingham added a P.S. to the letter from Mary, where Mary's like, hey, this treason sounds great. P.S. Can you tell me the names of the 6 guys? That was what Walsingham added.
I love it so much.
And then Tony Babs was like, oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. It's Gilbert, it's James, it's William. It's like he gives the names. And
I love that Mary's reply to this letter is like, yes, love this. If we could kill Elizabeth and I'll be free, that would be wonderful. Please be careful. I'm suspicious of spies. It's my favorite. I just imagine every time Walsingham opening that letter being like, yes, you should be more suspicious of spies. Mary, what are you doing?
And that's the thing. Like, it's, yeah, like 10 years ago, Mary would never have done this, but she was so broken down and so just like frantic. Well, and also it's like, what else is she going to do? Like, what's she going to do?
This is the first time anyone's like shown her they're on her side in 20 years.
Yeah. Like her son like betrayed her. Like Elizabeth's not helping her. It's just like she's been like, Amias Paulet is just like fucking nightmare, Puritan. Okay. So at the same time, so her now adult son, King James VI of Scotland, signed a treaty with England, but that didn't mention Mary. So her not being mentioned in this at all made her even more furious and even more ready to like get in on this Tony Babs plot. So, I mean, obviously, Tony Babs and his friends are all arrested because
surprise,
this is a terrible
they were not good at this.
Although I will say, one step better than T-Dog, because Tony Babs had burned Mary's letters. They weren't under his doormat. So
okay.
That's one thing he did right.
Little things.
But he was tortured until he revealed what the letters had said, but which is just kind of like, Cecil and Walsingham knew what they said because they had copies and had read them.
I know. Why did you do this to him? He's just a dummy.
He's just a little Eddie Redmayne. So Elizabeth ordered that the execution of the first 7 of these conspirators, 14 of them were arrested. So the first half of them, she said that this execution should be as awful and as public as possible to dissuade other people from doing treasons. So these guys it was gross. Like they were trigger warning. I don't know.
It was bad. You know how bad executions were.
This was especially bad. Even the most passionate Protestants were like, Elizabeth, this is like, maybe that's a bit much. And so the execution of the other half were done more privately and quickly. Which is what's interesting, isn't it? That Elizabeth's older sister, Mary, is like, oh my God, Bloody Mary, she killed all these Protestants. It's like, Elizabeth killed way more Catholics. But
yeah, she did.
She's the mother of the country or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and also. Like,
yeah, it's
body
interesting.
Count's fairly high.
It's interesting. It's interesting that there are similarities between their 2 reigns, and one of them is like, she was Gloriana, and the other one is like, she sucked. It's just interesting. Mary didn't know any of this had happened because she used to be on top of everything, but now she, between everybody and her letters and not having servants and no one helping her, like she didn't know that this plan hadn't happened. Like she sent a letter to Tony Babs being like, great, let's do this treason, and then just didn't hear anything. She didn't know that they were being executed.
And then she's like, okay, I guess we're just waiting for Spain. Let me just sit here and wait until Philip and the Armada show up to save me. Great.
So then she's taken by surprise when Amias Paulet was like, hey, do you want to go deer hunting? And she's like, oh my God, yes, I love hunting and riding horses, wearing pants. And so she thought like, oh, and this is so heartbreaking too. She's like, what? She's like, I get to go outside. Yay. So she's like, maybe I'm going to run into some important fancy people. So she's like, put on her best outfit. And she's just like, going hunting, wearing my outfit, like feeling like herself. And a group of men approached. And initially she thought, oh, these are maybe the noblemen. Maybe they're the guys who are here to rescue me. But instead they were emissaries from Cecil, who arrested her 2 secretaries. Mary was commanded to follow them, and she fell to the ground, refusing to move. Honestly, a classic move done by numerous toddlers, can be successful, but they took her.
Was not this time.
No. So she had been staying at this point at a place called Chartley Manor. Her chambers were looted by just people who wanted her stuff. Her letters and ciphers were gathered up and taken for evidence. Amias Paulet fired most of her staff because he was like, you're not going to need these servants anymore. And remember how much she cared for her servants. She was like always paying them and treating them so well. And this Puritan is just like, fuck off, all of you guys.
He sucks so bad. Just, ugh.
He's coming late in the game, But he's got a real shot at most villainous villain, Amias
Because
Pollock.
he's doing this for no reason. Like, there's no reason for him to be this.
He has no, like, what's it called? He's no, like, dice in the game. He's like,
got no standing. Like,
he's just some guy. He's not like, I want my grandson to be king. He's just like some fucking Puritan who just likes being an asshole, basically. I just wanted to have a little callback. Like, some of the staff who she had up to this point included young Willie, but also Bastian Pages and his wife, Crystalie Hogg, who you might recall, that was the wedding that she attended, the dance when Darnley was killed. Those two had been with her this whole time. Bastian Pages, and this is the importance of, if you have a memorable name, I'm going to mention you in my podcast more than once. There's probably some other servants who I have come across, but they're all called James, and I forgot them. So Mary is taken to Fotheringay Castle, and she's told she's going to be put on trial. Because remember, even though she's a queen now, there's a thing where it's like, these like 17 specific to her laws are like, well, if Mary...
The Mary Queen of Scots specifically can be put on trial law was passed 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So she's going to be put on trial at Fotheringay Castle. On October 15th, 1586, the trial began. So she entered the room to see, there was 37 men there who were peers. They were like, I guess, like her jury, I guess. Mary was wearing her trademark black velvet, a gown with a train with a long sheer veil billowing behind her. She's being like, I'm Mary and my look is black and white, like a veil, like, let's go.
It's so legendary, the way she dresses for this. She's just like, bitch, look at me. I'm here. Let's go.
Well, and this is why William Cecil was always like, she can never appear in court. Like, she'll make too much of a sensation. She is like...
You know how this woman uses an outfit? She cannot show up.
This is like Rihanna at the Met Gala. Like, we can't allow this fashion power. Anyway, so she came in and there's like a big throne chair. And she was like, oh, I guess that's for me because I'm the queen. And they're like, oh, contraire. That chair represents Elizabeth, who's not here. You have to go sit in like a normal chair. So she was not allowed to know the charges, the evidence, or to have a lawyer. So this is even shittier than the original inquiry in terms of like a fake trial at which she has no chance. But she said, I am alone without counsel or anyone to speak in my behalf. My papers and notes have been taken from me, so I am destitute of all aid, taken at a disadvantage. My crimes consist in my birth, the injuries that have been inflicted on me, and my religion. Which, fair/true.
And the treason you were going to do, but...
And the treason. But, those other things led to this. So knowing that these guys were going to yell at her John Knox style and just be like, you're a whore, etc., she had prepared a whole counter-offensive. You know what? She came in here prepared. Like, she knew this was a fake trial, but she was still, like, prepared. Because she's good at this shit. So part of what she did is, like, the only example I can think of is a terrible example. But, so she entered, like, she's wearing her outfit, but she wasn't like, I'm 6 feet tall and gorgeous. She entered, like, stooped, leaning on the arms of servants, looking feeble and weak. Like, the veil kind of accentuated her delicacy and her innocence. She said, I cannot walk without assistance nor use my arms, and I spend most of my time confined to bed. She wept and cried, presenting herself as a victim rather than as an assassin. And the comparison I'm going to say is that time that...
When Gandalf shows up in Rohan in the second Lord of the Rings movie, and he's leaning on somebody's arm, and he's like wrapped in an old cloak, and he's like, I am a weak old man. And then like when he needs to be powerfully like beam of light, like that's what this is. That's strategically being like...
She's just like, oh, I'm a poor frail woman, meh. Anyway, but then William Cecil was like, yeah, but when you were the teen queen of France, did you not have your coat of arms include England? And people said you were queen of England? And she was like, that was a million years ago, 10 Vulgar History episodes ago. Like, what, really?
That's the most recent treason you have?
But that's really what put her on the map for him. Like, when that happened, like when the coat of arms was like, Cecil was like gonna destroy her from that, really. Anyway, she's like, yes, okay, I did do that, but that was my Diggy's uncle's decision, and I was just a child. And then she's like, Walsingham, you were the one who invented coded letters and plots against Elizabeth. This is all fake. I wasn't involved in the Tony Babs plot. Quote, can I be responsible for the criminal projects of a few desperate men, which they planned without my knowledge or participation?
And the answer is yes, because they passed a law to that effect 5 years ago that, yes, she can be held liable without her participation.
Yeah. So there was a debate. Here's a quote I want to say. So some of the men who were there, the jury said, this is like a tag yourself. Okay. They called her the daughter of sedition, the mother of rebellion, the nurse of impiety, the handmaid of iniquity, the sister of unshamefulness.
I am the sister of unshamefulness.
I think I'm the nurse of impiety. Anyway, they all agreed she was guilty of treason and should be sentenced to death. And Elizabeth was like, or should she? So at the parliament where this verdict was supposed to be ratified, Elizabeth was like, maybe. So she gave 2 speeches. She was very good, Elizabeth, at giving speeches that said nothing but sounded good.
She's a real White House press secretary of a person. Like you can talk for 45 minutes and she didn't say a damn thing.
So her speeches were kind of like, yes, maybe we should execute her, or maybe we should not execute her, are 2 options that exist right now. So it's her same thing, where it's just like, if she had Mary executed, then England might be attacked by France, Spain, Scotland, the Vatican, all at once.
Yeah.
And also putting a monarch to death who was her cousin could taint her reputation as the fair and virtuous virgin queen. And then also, if you kill one queen, then it's like, hey, guess who can be killed? Queens! And that puts her at risk. So that's on the one side. On the other side, it's like Mary is like a threat to her and like was planning to assassinate her. So this trial was in October. So then it's like turns to winter and Elizabeth is still like, what to do? Mary, meanwhile, is just like writing what she assumes she's going to be executed. She writes what she thinks will be her final letters, gifting what few items she had left to the people she still liked. She sent a diamond to the Spanish ambassador with a request it be used to help pay her staff after she was dead because she was a good boss. Although, how did she still have a diamond? Was it with her when she went out horse riding that day?
Must have been. She was dressed well.
True. Maybe it was like in like her earrings or something.
Although she did spend like a year at Fotheringay waiting for the trial and then waiting for Elizabeth to make up her mind. So she might have been like, can you send my stuff from the other house?
True. Yeah.
She'd like to have her own stuff with her.
I know, but the other people had gone through her stuff.
I guess
Anyway.
what treason was she going to commit with one diamond?
So, December 4th, the death sentence was announced. Elizabeth could still revoke it, but now the public knew. So this was kind of like Elizabeth running a test to be like, how will people react if they know that she's going to be executed? And it played pretty well. Church bells were rung, bonfires were lit. People in England were like, huzzah, basically. People in Scotland and like France and the Catholic countries were kind of like, I don't know about this, but nobody was threatening war. So that was like, okay. Mary's biggest concern now, like knowing she was going to die, was that Elizabeth was going to execute her privately because Mary wanted to have a big scene because she's going to be like, you don't want me to be a symbol for like Catholic martyrs? Like, fuck you. I'm going to be the biggest symbol.
Fuck you. I'll be the best martyr. Yep.
Yeah.
She loves the show. And if this is going to be her last show, Mary's going to go out with some drama.
Exactly. So she was just worried that Elizabeth was going to kill her in private. So she wrote to Elizabeth being like, please let my execution be in public. And also, please, I would like to be buried in France, not in Scotland. This letter also intercepted and kept in Cecil's files, not delivered to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth was like, okay, well, if Mary expresses regret, maybe I can call this off. But Mary did not express, like she was all in her martyr era. She's just like, I'm going to be executed and it's going to be the biggest fuck you ever. Like, she's not going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Protestant now. Like,
absolutely not.
No,
it's
no,
too
no.
late for that. She spent 18 years sitting alone getting mad. She's not going to be like, oh no, actually now it's fine.
Yeah.
She was ready to have Elizabeth murdered by the King of Spain. She's not going back now.
No. And so Elizabeth went to Amias Paulet and was like, can you like quietly poison her food so she can just kind of like die of like quote unquote natural causes? And Amias Paulet, to his credit, was like, I'm a Puritan. No, Puritans don't poison people. So, I mean, his ethics are interesting.
I ruined her life in every other way, but I won't do that.
I draw the line somewhere. And the thought of her like impending like martyr-based death seemed to energize her. Like you're right, she had this show and she's just going to be like, you're going to execute me and I'm going to fuck your life. Like, here's what's happening. Her physician reported he had not seen her so joyous nor so constantly at ease for the last 7 years. Like this.
And she's also like, I do think her Catholic faith is really genuine.
Yeah.
And she's been trapped in a house without knowing what's going to happen to her for so long. Now she's like, I'm going to die. I've done all of the things right. I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to be free. I see my mom. It'll be great. I just have to get there. Like there's a a real martyr energy to her that I think she is taking some emotional solace in. Not just that it's a fuck you, because it is, but it's also like, this is my out. This is how I get out of this.
And there's also something for her specific kind of Catholicness, that there's a glory, like being a martyr is a goal for some people in a way. To die for your faith is like the best way to die. So
she would have preferred not to die, I think, and have been Queen of Scotland. But this is not a bad, I mean, it's a bad outcome, but like, it's a good bad outcome. This is the way if she's going out on her terms, and she's going out with drama. So that feels, I'm sure, like a comfort.
Definitely. And there's definitely something about the Catholic, everything you just said, like finding comfort in the fact that I think it's something like one of the books I read, but I was just like, I don't have the brain capacity to understand what martyrdom means to Catholic people. But I think it's like a shortcut to heaven or something. It's like the most honorable thing you can do is to die for your faith. Like, this is like...
Yeah. I mean, they associate saints and martyrs together. So like you've conducted some sort of miracle in your life, or you were willing to give up everything for God. And that's like, I don't know if this was still in the purgatory days for Catholics or not. I believe it probably was. So if you died and you had like sins you weren't repented for yet, you would spend time in purgatory, and people would have to pray for you so you could get to heaven, and it would be painful and take a long time, and you would still suffer. But martyrdom was like straight to the front of the line, right to heaven. You did an incredible job. Look at you dying for God. So like, yeah, it's a big move.
It's a positive thing for her in that way. So the fact that she was like energized was like, oh, interesting. But it's like, to her and her faith, this was like not best case scenario, but that would be being alive. But second best is.
And it's just such an interesting thing to think about her personality when you compare what happened to like Jane Grey.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very similar kind of.
It's very
martyrdom.
similar.
Like, you're just like, oh, but the vibes here. Mary's like, fuck this, I'm going out. And maybe it's age, maybe it's maturity, maybe it's personality. I don't know, but it just feels so different.
Mm-hmm. So time is passing. So Elizabeth has still not signed the death warrant. She's just like dragging this out because she's just really wants to make sure before she commits to this, it's like the right thing and it's not going to make her look bad.
And no one's going to invade, preferably.
Yeah. So February 1st. So this is such a like play acted thing. So Cecil took a sick day. Usually he's the one who like brings her the paperwork to sign, but he's like, oh, I'm sick today. So he sent like this other lackey to bring the paperwork to Elizabeth, and he tucked the death warrant in among the pile of other papers. So Elizabeth was like, I'm just signing some papers. So she could plausibly later be like, oh no, the death warrant was there. What an accident. I didn't mean to do that. So that she signed it in this kind of like play acting way.
And that's so often how it's told, the story. She's like, oh, she didn't know, or oh, it was a mistake. And it's like, well, that's her PR. She knew. Yeah. She knew what she was doing. She wanted it to seem like she didn't commit, even though she had to do it.
Because that's her whole thing, I've come to learn, is just being like not taking a side. But also she signed the paperwork and everyone was just like, because she had been like not deciding for so long, they were like, okay, we're planning this execution right now before Elizabeth can change her mind.
Let's go.
So that was February 1st. February 7th, Mary was told she'd be executed the next day. Cecil said she seemed not to be in any terror, but rather with a smiling cheer and pleasing countenance, digested and accepted, saying that her death would be welcome to her, which, as we had said. So that night, she handed out the last of her wardrobe to her few remaining staff. One guy was instructed, do you remember she made the like bedding set for her son that was like the family crests and like pictures of her as a lion in a cage and stuff? So she instructed somebody to send that to her son because that they held her truth. She wanted him to know her story. If he knew the allegories she was using, which I don't know. In the early hours of February 8th, Mary wrote her last letter to the King of France, who was Henri. Her heart was still in the land where she had been happiest, which was France, which was the least complicated era of her entire life. So of course it was.
By a considerable margin, France was the best.
Yes. So then she stayed up all night. At 6 a.m., she retired for private prayer. And then 2 hours later at 8 a.m., they came for her. She wanted her Catholic chaplain to be with her, but that was not allowed. She has to have at least some of her women with her, and 2 were permitted, Janet Kennedy and Elizabeth Curl. So Elizabeth Curl was the wife of her secretary, Gilbert Curl. along with 4 men from her household. Okay, so Allison, explain to me. So the execution happened indoors?
Yes, inside the castle in one of a hall. They set up like the execution block and everything inside, and they like anyone who was around could go and watch it. This is not the way things are usually done, and I do think it's like when Mary had asked specifically, "Can this not be indoors? Can this not be private?" I would like to make a scene. I think Cecil is probably like, guess what? Who we should not allow to make a scene? Let's do this indoors, private.
It just seems like messy on the floor.
I have a suspicion. I have 2 things to say to that. One, every old-timey floor was like covered in rushes and plants instead of like carpet because the floors were always gross. So they could have just swept that out and put new stuff in. And also, second point, I don't think Cecil cared about the floors. I think he was like, I've been waiting for this for 35 years. Fuck the floors.
Yeah. I was just startled when I realized that it happened indoors.
No, it's weird. It's hard to picture it inside.
Yeah, and I may be conflating the Mary Queen of Scots films I've seen with films of like Anne Boleyn's execution or Jane Grey, but I'm just picturing this like outdoor courtyard thing. But
like at the Tower of London.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's still Northern England.
Yeah. So Mary, aged 44, she looked much older due to the life she had lived. She could barely walk and had to lean on others to make her way to the scaffold. People who were there to witness it included Mr. Bess as well as Amias Paulet. So Mary wore a gown of black satin with a long train and a transparent white veil edged in delicate lace. Her gown was adorned with buttons representing acorns, symbol of the spirit. Her long black sleeves were underlaid with others of purple velvet, a claim of royalty. Around her neck, she wore a wax disc etched with the image of the Lamb of Christ, and around her waist, she had wound 2 rosaries. She clutched a prayer book in one hand, in the other, a small crucifix. So it's just like...
It's the most Catholic fucking outfit in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
She had one last outfit, and she was like, how can I make this the most dramatic outfit anyone has ever worn?
Well, just wait. So, the Protestant dean of the Peterborough Cathedral was there, and he began to deliver a lengthy speech, but Mary started talking over him in Latin at the same time.
I love her so much. She was like, fuck you, I'm a Catholic. I will be Catholic loudly in front of you.
So he stopped talking because she was talking. And then when he stopped talking, then she switched from Latin to English so everyone there would understand what she was saying. So she prayed for an end to her troubles. She prayed for her son and for Elizabeth. She asked God to forgive England and excuse her enemies. At the end, she held up the crucifix, kissed it, made the sign of the cross. So just like, love it. Like the combination of like righteous martyrdom and just like drama is so Mary to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so the 2 women she had with her came up to unpin her outer garments for her final outfit reveal. So this is like, so she had like an outfit inside of another outfit.
She did a quick change, guys. Like she's on stage on Broadway. She died with a quick change.
Yeah. It's like the outfit reveal. It's like, again, it's like a RuPaul's Drag Race, like, you know, like an outfit in an outfit. So inside of the black outfit, she's wearing a blood red petticoat and bodice, the color of martyrdom, symbolic of human sacrifice. Allegedly, Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, had also worn red to her execution. So a little bit of like, hey, Elizabeth, like, what's this make you think of? And then the women who were with her put red sleeves on to match the dress. So she went from the black outfit to this red ensemble. One of the executioners went to remember she's wearing the like wax disc from around her neck because I'm so sorry.
You just realized why.
No. A tip for the hangman. The name of your book. Because usually hangmen, like you give the person who's executing you, you would give them a gift to be kind of like, I forgive you or whatever.
You forgive them and then you pay them because it's their job.
Yeah.
They get some of your clothes or you get a couple of coins and they're like, thanks, appreciate it. Now I'm going to.
I didn't write this down. I can't believe I didn't write this down. But did you know what the executioner's name was?
No, I don't.
Bull. No, just one word. His name is just Bull.
First name, last name, like Cher.
Yeah. So Bull tried to take this from around her neck because it would have been like worth something or whatever.
And also in the way. And
in the way. And she's like, no, and gave it to one of her women. And then Janet Kennedy wrapped a white cloth around her eyes, and it wasn't just like a regular white cloth. It was like the kind used at Mass to protect the wine. So they'd like taken it from like a Catholic church.
Because she's so extra.
Yeah.
Ugh.
She embraced and kissed her women, made the sign of the cross again, then knelt down and recited, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit."
The last words of Jesus fucking Christ. Our dramatic queen was like, you know who else reminds me of this situation? The Lord Jesus Christ.
It was like, you know, if you're going to be executed as a Catholic martyr, she just like, she did it. Like
He hit all of the beats.
That's what you do. So then there was a thing where the executioner held up her head to be like, look, she's really dead. But he was only holding the wig. Guess.
Mary Seton, meanwhile, in France is like,
There is a legend that her lips continued to move in prayer for 15 minutes afterwards. Mr. Bess cried, and then, apparently, one of her little dogs, a little terrier dog, had crept under her long skirt and stayed by her side and been with her as she died. Afterwards, the dog allegedly lay in the blood between her head and her shoulders and refused to leave. Eventually, the dog was taken to be cleaned because everything, her outfit, everything that had been there had to be removed. Well, okay, the dog was cleaned. All of her outfits had to be burned. Because basically there's that weird Catholic thing where people take stuff, relics, and make them be like holy items. And they're like, nothing from this execution can remain. Even the blood on the dog needs to be cleaned off.
Because otherwise it would be like you have it in the altar of some treasonous Catholic church somewhere. It's like they have the fingernails of Mary Stuart and they can perform miracles or something.
But you have feelings about the dog, I think.
It's adorable. And it also makes me incredibly sad. So it's like that tiny last note almost of comedy at the end, which I find extremely upsetting to me. It's like there's this, if she staged everything, she choreographed every single beat of her execution, and then just imagining at the very end of it, a little dog poking its nose out from under her skirt is just like, that makes me want to cry.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is why in so many, like she became a real heroine in the 19th century art world. There's so many paintings and they're mostly about like Rizzio and Darnley, but there's almost always a little dog in every one of those paintings. And I think it's because this part of the story really connects with people.
And I don't know logistically if it's true because like, how did that dog hide under her skirt as she walked through an entire room? Like that's an extremely well-trained dog. I don't know, but
you know what?
It's quite an image.
She could have, I wouldn't put it past her to train the dog to do that. Like she'd stage managed this whole thing. But what's interesting we're going to talk next time about her legacy and stuff. But part of where she became a popular subject for artists in the 19th century was because Victoria was the queen. And they're like, okay, we have this queen. It's like, well, the last time there was a queen, it was Elizabeth. It's like, but she like didn't marry and didn't have children. So they're like, but Mary did. But we can't blame Elizabeth for what happened to Mary. So they just really paint Mary as this like, oh, woe is me. Like fortune and fate have like fucked me over. Like it was a weird rebrand of both Mary and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to like wrap up the execution era. So her severed head was shown to crowds outside through a window to be like, look, she's dead. Mary's women wanted to strip her body and lay out her corpse, but they weren't allowed. In fact, her servants were all locked in their rooms. Her body was embalmed and wrapped in wax cloth, and a local plumber came to encase it in lead. Plumber?
Wild. A wild detail I did not know.
Yeah. This was not standard. But
wait, plumber. Yeah. Does that just mean like someone who works with lead? Like PB, the elemental symbol for lead? Because there was no indoor plumbing. So it wasn't a plumber. I think it was a lead worker.
That makes more sense.
You watched Anne and I look at each other like, what toilet was he fixing at the castle?
Yeah, so a local lead worker came to encase her body. But this is like the body was embalmed. And again, because they didn't want her like finger bone to become a relic or whatever, they had to just be like, no one can ever touch this body. So when Elizabeth was told Mary was dead, she was like, oh, Herman, my pills, pretending to be upset. Like, what? That paperwork I signed? Me? Anyway, the substitute, Cecil, who had given her the papers, was put in the Tower of London for 18 months to be like, how dare you give this?
Oh my God, I'd be so mad.
Like,
son of a bitch.
Yeah. Honestly, Elizabeth, like, she's that bitch too. Like, this is like, she played her part as well. Anyway, up in Scotland, her son, James, was just like, wait, what just happened? So he severed his deal with England. He's like, I'm not going to be your ally anymore. Fuck you, England.
Which would have made Mary really happy if she could have known that.
Definitely.
That would have
for
been very
once
sad.
in France. So there was, back when she like came over, there was two poets both called Pierre. One of them was a dirtbag stalker. The other Pierre, who had been her French tutor, who's the one who like got her really interested in French poetry, wrote, "Ah, Kingdom of Scotland, I think your days are now shorter than they were and your nights longer since you have lost that princess who was your light," which is lovely. Like, basically, France was like, oh, we loved her.
They all fucked up.
Yeah. So in France, a memorial is held at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The Archbishop said, besides that marvelous beauty which attracted the eyes of all the world, she had a disposition so excellent, an understanding so clear, and a judgment so sound as could rarely be paralleled by a person of her age and sex. She possessed great courage, but it was tempered by feminine gentleness and sweetness. Mary was given a state funeral. This was all really tricky for Elizabeth. She's like, well, she's a queen who's dead, but also treason, but also we can't support her, but also a queen. So she was given a state funeral at Peterborough Cathedral, the same place where Catherine of Aragon had been interred, which is kind of like, this is where we put the queens we don't really want to.
This is the cathedral for problem queens that we've fucked up with.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a Protestant service, and they like paid local peasant women to like go there and cry as the official mourners, because her staff was still locked in their rooms, I think. We're ending here for today because that was extraordinarily long. And we're going to do all the scoring, talking about her legacy and stuff. Not next week. Next week is Claire Hunter, embroidery talk.
Embroidery time. I'm excited for that one.
And then the one after that is going to be, we're going to talk about the score and stuff. Allison, can you please explain to people in a non-spoilery way how your book involves some of this story?
Yeah. My book is about Walsingham's spy network during this time, essentially. And so it starts sort of in the early stages of the Babington plot. And one of the major plot threads through that book, through about the midpoint of the book, is how my protagonist is engaged in the Babington plot and the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. I don't think that's a spoiler. I am following at least that much history. There's some creative license going on throughout, but I am telling kind of the story that we did in today's episode in my book, A Tip for the Hangman, available wherever books are sold.
And you sort of imagine Kit Marlowe in sort of the Ryan Phillippe type role.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you all heard me get extremely excited about Ryan Phillippe, because I think that role is so interesting. And I was like, okay, what would it be like if that person was also a dumbass gay disaster? That is what I did.
Exactly. And then for people who want to keep up with you and what you're up to, you have a website.
I do, AllisonEpstein.com. That website also links to my Substack, which is Dirtbags Through the Ages, which features many of the assholes we've discussed in this Mary Queen of Scots series, as well as numerous others and why they suck.
And if people want to go back and listen, you've been on numerous episodes of this podcast, but the very first appearance you did was when A Tip for the Hangman first came out, and you were talking about Christopher Marlowe. So if you want to go back and hear you sort of explain more about the book and about Christopher Marlowe and what bits of history you took to extrapolate to be like, what if he was Ryan Phillippe? Like we talk about that there. If you scroll back in your Vulgar History on your podcatcher, you can see that. And I usually have notes in front of me, but this document, I didn't have notes. So I'm going to try to remember off the top of my head. So on Instagram, I'm on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod. I'm on TikTok at Vulgar History. And if you want transcriptions, which are being done by Aveline Malik from The Wordery, you can get transcriptions of the most recent episodes at vulgarhistory.com. Just click on the episode you want. And like Aveline is like slowly going through some of these episodes, like today's are incredibly long. So she does what she can. Anyway, we're slowly adding transcripts to episodes. And so if the one you want to read doesn't have transcriptions, just check back because it'll be there shortly. And Patreon, I'm at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. That's where you can get early ad-free access to this podcast. Vulgar Peace Theater episodes featuring Allison and also our friend Lana talking about various costume dramas from history. I do think this isn't finalized and it's just a proposal, but I think the three of us should watch the Saoirse Ronan, Mary Queen of Scots movie. I think that would be very in discussion.
I think we have to at this point. I feel like there has to be at least one Mary Queen of Scots film, and that's going to be the easiest one to find.
And I think it will be interesting for me because I watched that when it came out. But now that I know who so many of the men are, I'll be like, oh, that's that guy. Oh my God, Hollywood icon Jimmy Stewart. Like instead of just like, I don't know who all these men are, so I'll just focus on Mary. I'll be like, that guy. Scottish Machiavelli.
A Douglas. It's a Douglas.
Oh my God, a Douglas. Yeah, I think that will be a thing I will yell in that movie. Anyway, so that's coming up. And is that everything? Oh, merch. Yes, most importantly, the new merch that I have, the A Cat Named Hepburn merch, which is inspired by Mary's own cat embroidery. So, but instead of a ginger cat representing Elizabeth and a shapeless blob of a mouse representing Mary's psychological devastation, it's a tortoiseshell cat who looks happy, who represents my cat Hepburn, who has been walking in and out of this recording this whole time, and a cute little mouse who's happy, and they're friends. And so it's a very different vibe from Mary's embroidery. Anyway, you can get that on a t-shirt, a sticker, a pin, a mug, what I got for myself, a pillow, just to have a real Mary Queen of Scots treason cushion vibe. Anyway, you can get that at vulgarhistory.com/store, where it's best for American people. And then vulgarhistory.redbubble.com is if you're in another country, the shipping is better at that website. Allison, you've dedicated so many hours of your life to talking about this with me, and I could not appreciate it more. I
do feel like the listeners should know that Anne and I have recorded 2 episodes at a time each time we've done this. And this morning we started hours and hours ago, and I just looked up and realized what time it is now. Time flies when we're talking about Mary Queen of Scots, but this has been a full Saturday experience.
It has been. Thank you so much for spending several Saturdays with me, and I look forward to having you back again for when we get to the scoring, which is going to be a wild discussion.
I cannot wait.
You know what, Titso Brigade, let me know what scoring you think should be the scoring, because we can maybe incorporate that into our thoughts as well. Anyway, thank you so much, Allison. Everybody, I don't know, I was going to be like, if you're going to be executed, do it with style, but that's not a funny joke. That's a terrible thing to say.
Don't get executed.
Don't get executed.
But honestly, approach every day like you're going to do a quick costume change into a dramatic gown.
Always have an outfit inside your outfit, because you never know.
You never know.
And check to see if there's a little dog in your skirt, little cute surprise for you. I don't know. I am getting delusional from having talked about this for so long. Thank you, Allison. Everybody, pants on, tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Anne Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Murachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Nowadays, trends and news cycles change faster than we can blink. But there are some things that withstand the test of time. And if you're looking for a connection to something timeless, and maybe also a glimpse of life at a slower pace, I believe everyone can relate to the very human experiences explored in Jane Austen's novels. And that's where I come in. My name is Allison Larkin. I'm a writer, comedian, and narrator and host of the Jane Austen podcast with Allison Larkin. I spent a lot of my childhood in the part of England where Jane Austen lived and wrote, and now that I live in the States, nothing gives me a sense of homecoming quite like narrating her books. On this show, you'll listen to award-winning narration. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that. As well as conversations with actors, writers, and other fascinating people who all share a passionate love for Jane Austen. So please, join me as we embark on a wonderful journey through Jane Austen's work. Be sure to listen and subscribe to The Jane Austen Podcast with Allison Larkin, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
We're the Ghost Story Guys.
And every 2 weeks, we explore first-person stories of encounters with the paranormal from all around the world.
Then we have some fun reacting to those stories. We like to say our goal is to scare the hell out of you, then make you laugh.
Belief in the paranormal is not required. All you need is a love of great storytelling and curiosity about the world around you.
Subscribe to the Ghost Story Guys now on your favorite podcatcher to hear episodes like High Strangeness in Chicago, The Mystery of Missing Time, and The Haunting of Vietnam, along with dozens of others.
We've talked about mythical bridges, doppelgangers, haunted seaside towns, and so much more.
Remember that story about the guy who was trapped inside a dream and something was hunting him? That was upsetting.
Yes it was.
Want us to help ruin your sleep? Come find the Ghost Story Guys on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else fine podcasts live, or at ghoststoryguys.com.